Good evening, everyone. Nice little reminder there of the actual Time Hops beer festival, which we had recently. But it's time for some Time Hops beer tasting. So welcome, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook this evening, get your comments in and we will try and chat about them. See, early comment here from the guys at the Craft Beer channel, who very cleverly said Hopping Thursday. Talking Craft Beer channel, Johnny, good evening, how are we?
Super excited, how are you?
Yeah, very good. Super excited indeed. We've also got Matt Lincoln, our events manager.
Yeah,
Matt. And of course, Sean, our head brewer. Hey, Sean.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, good, good. And also joined again by Luke from Yakima Chief. How's it going, Luke?
Hi, everyone. Good, thanks.
Good to see everyone on. So a little bit of advice first off. We're going to be trying all 4 Time Hops beers. So hopefully you've got all 4 in front of you. We will try and give us enough time to sort of drink them all. But what I would recommend, have 4 glasses ready to go. Have the beers ready to go. Maybe don't pour them all out, just pour a little bit out and we'll go from there. So, right, where do we start with this? Luke, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Yakima Chief first?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Luke Hochstein. I head up the marketing team for Yakima Chief. I've been kind of around the craft beer industry for about 15 years, worked in some great brewers, importers, distributors, had the pleasure of working with Johnny Garrett for many years in a previous role as well. And then, since joining YCH, it's just spreading the good word about hops more than anything, nice. And working with some fantastic brewers like yourselves.
Good times. Johnny, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, just in case no one is aware?
I'm Johnny. I'm co-founder of the Craft Beer channel, which is a YouTube channel dedicated to great beer, great breweries, and increasingly home brewing, thanks to the lockdown. I'm also a beer writer, so I've got 3 books and write for Good Beer Hunting and lots of other bits. 3
books. That's a lovely little humble bag. Where can we buy those books?
Oh, you can get them in some good bookstores, some good bottle shops. And my latest book, which I should have to hand. I do have to hand. 1 second.
Leave. That's available on the Soren Craft Brew website.
Oh, it might be. It's definitely in the tap room. Yeah, so it's a year in beer, all about seasonality in beer and in brewing. It's won 2 awards. Fortnum & Mason Drinks Book of the Year. British Guild of Food Writers Beer Book of the Year. Drinks Book of the Year. My mum likes it. You know, it's getting all the accolades.
Talking of mums, it's our marketing manager Andy Nolan's mum's birthday. So happy birthday, Mrs. Nolan. It's got to be
Happy
in there.
birthday.
We will all toast. Matt, do you want to give us a quick rundown of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name's Matt. Hi, you may remember me from such videos as 2 Minute Brewery Tour and how to access the tap yard in lockdown. Massive thanks. But yeah, no, I'm the events manager. I think probably a lot of people knew me from online videos in the first 2 years. I did join Siren 1 week before the first lockdown, and there was a little bit of banter in the office, wasn't there, Tim? That I was the worst events manager that you've ever had because I didn't do much for the first year and a bit.
I was events manager, and there was no events in the first year. It was awful.
But I have been on the road quite a lot recently. I've actually been spreading the good word of Time Hops at not only our festival, but Great British Beer Festival and London Craft Beer Festival. So I'm home for this weekend only, and then back to it.
Excellent. And last but by no means least, Sean, our head brewer. What's to say about you, Sean?
I just make the beer that hopefully keeps everyone happy.
There you go. You're the main event.
Well,
right,
I have a team that do that.
Okay, so as mentioned, we're talking through Time Hops. If you haven't heard of it, it was a series of 4 beers, or is a series of 4 beers that we brewed. So, Sean, can you talk to us a little bit before we start drinking, just the sort of history of this project, where the idea came from, who pitched that idea, what were we doing?
Yeah, so we meet fairly regularly, a few of us in the team, just to throw ideas around and start building ideas for beers that we want to make and produce. And this idea came from Steve, who runs our barrel store. And the ideas evolved quite a bit, but the name Time Hops was there from the beginning. And the basic first idea was, at a point in time, we only had access to certain raw materials, certain hop varieties, and wanted to look at what beers we could make, thinking that we were in that time. And then the projects evolved from there. We wanted to tell stories with the project as well, and we got the opportunity to work with some really great breweries that have really kind of helped evolve the whole evolution of IPAs and helped us with us making a kind of homage to these beers that they've made.
Nice. Okay. So what was the reason these 4/5 hops were chosen?
Well, I think all of us actually started thinking about it, the natural starting point was Cascade with the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and how they evolved that, and the story of Ken Grossman and hopping beers more than people were doing at the time. So it was a great starting point, and then we had to think about it from there. Darren and I both have really good memories of Racer 5 from the early days. We both were in the brewing industry, so that kind of became the next one. And Centennial was obviously the jump up from Cascade. And then I love the story of Vinny from Russian River saving Simcoe. So that kind of was the next natural step. And then we kind of struggled with the next one. I think Johnny helped us get the connection with the Alchemist, and we ended up picking 2 hops for that, being Citra and Mosaic, just because they both stand together kind of thing really well. So yeah, it was a good choice, I think.
So this is all about finding the hops that sort of shaped the industry, and then finding those beers that sort of shaped those hops.
Yeah.
So with that, if anyone's in the comments that just wants to drop in those beers that changed sort of their minds, or if there was a beer that made you start thinking about hops, and drop it in, because we'd love to discuss that. We do have another guest with us as well, so just like to introduce Reiki. Martin, how are we doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Cheers, guys.
Great. Just give us a bit about yourself.
So I'm the general manager at the Malt Miller. The Malt Miller is a homebrew retailer in the UK and Europe. And we supply basically brewery quality ingredients to homebrewers, and also product to breweries as well.
Excellent. And I believe you've got a pack put together for Time Hops as well, right?
Yeah, well, Sean was very generously shared the recipe that he got developed for Time Hops Cascade. and that's been on sale with us now for a few weeks, and it's proving really, really popular.
Great. That's good to hear. Maltmiller.co.uk, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Excellent, super. So homebrewers, get out there. All right, I reckon we should just get into these first beers, and then we can discuss the hops and everything that goes around it. So, what do we think?
Let's do it. Let's go for it.
Cascade up first. I'm very jealous. I'm very jealous of Johnny's setup this evening with his nice camera.
I only bring out the high production values when I'm on other people's streams, just to ramp up that jealousy.
I tried to get this set up myself with 2 cameras plugged in here, and the reason I'm really bright red face is because nothing is working this evening, and it's really frustrating. So, anyway, if you're at home, grab your Cascades and let's get these beers poured out.
Johnny's done that many times before, isn't he?
Yeah, I'm going to grab mine from the fridge.
I so nearly had one of these before we started as well, because it's just such a deliciously crushable beer. I was like, we had 15 minutes before we went live, and I was like, I could knock that out in 15 minutes. But I managed to hold back.
Okay, so Sean, how did you come about with thinking about Cascade and using Sierra Nevada Pale Ale for this beer?
Well, we got the opportunity to chat to Sierra Nevada directly, which was amazing. We spoke to a guy called Scott who has been there for, I think, over 25 years. He's the production manager for one of the sites, and he spent ages with us, very open, gave us loads of information. And one of the big things that we took away from it is the use of whole leaf hops, which is a big thing that Sierra Nevada do with their pale ale. And that was a bit of fun for us to figure out how we were going to do that and try to recreate that. They gave us all the information. They'd take measurements everywhere in the process and gave us all that data, which was incredible. Although we can't measure all of it. But it was, using what's basically known as their house yeast as well was another big thing that we got to do. But that's commercially available yeast. So we used, Chico yeast in this, and whole leaf hops.
Nice. So let's talk more about the hops. Luke, do you want to jump in here and talk to us a bit about Cascade?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Cascade's kind of where everything changed in the US industry, in the hop industry, that is. I mean, up until that point, most of what was being grown in the States, much like in Europe at that time, was trying to find something that's going to give a nice kind of solid alpha, good bitterness level, something that's going to try and compete with the big like German and Czech varieties. You have a lot of like European derived hops up until that point. So a lot of like Nugget, Willamette, these kind of things, a lot of Nugget. And then in like the late 50s, early 60s, the USDA breeding program, which is partnered up with Oregon State University, really started to kind of kick that breeding program into gear to try and find the latest like high alpha variety, trying to find something that's a little bit more commercially sound and viable for the farmers. And somewhere along the lines, this was kind of late 60s by this point, they hit on what became Cascade, commercially released right at the beginning of the 70s as well. So you can almost track what is modern craft beer by the existence of Cascade. I mean, we're really fortunate. Yakima Chief is a grower-owned company, so I get to speak to farmers that their families like the first people to plant hops in Oregon, the first people to plant hops in Washington, and the stories they tell of when some of these varieties came out completely changed their outlook on what could be grown, what was viable for a brewery as well. And Cascade was complete sea change in that. And it was the first one that brewers themselves really picked up. I mean, Sean mentioned Ken Grossman there as like one of the biggest kind of proponents of Cascade in the early days. And it stopped people thinking about hops as this just commodity product to add pure alpha into generic beers. And at that point it was like, well, actually, this is a really beautiful aroma product as well, which is something that we were in the UK, we were quite far advanced in that at these kind of in the 60s and 70s. Aroma was why we were growing some of the native varieties over here, but it was a completely new thing to the States, and hitting those kind of like lemony, pine, the things that we now kind of quintessentially call American hop flavors really does start with Cascade for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really did all start with Sierra Nevada. Johnny, you spent quite a bit of time obviously putting together the documentary for this. What did you sort of learn in the process, about Sierra Nevada and the history of that?
I think, so I knew quite a lot of it going in. The really interesting thing for me, which sadly didn't actually make it into the documentary, so this is a bit of a bit of editor's cut, director's cut. That's the word, editor's cut. Was about how Ken Grossman, who founded Sierra Nevada, came across Cascade actually while he was running a homebrew store. So that's what he did before he founded his brewery. And so he was, for a couple of years, I think it was 3 or 4 years that he had this homebrew store before Sierra started. He was championing Cascade to other breweries, to other homebrewers. So he was by no means the first person to use it. But I think that him having 3 or 4 years of experience, both homebrewing with Cascade himself, but also hearing the experiences of other people using Cascade, meant that when he came to use it, he really went to town. So actually, I was chatting to Martin Cornell for another documentary I'm working on. And he was talking about how really Sierra Nevada Pale Ale should have been called an IPA. It was nearly strong enough historically. It certainly was back at the time when IPAs, Greek IPA was, 3.8? So it was an IPA in all but the name that they gave it because of the amount of hops and the amount of dry hops that was going in. So he was adding crazy amounts compared to all the people that he was selling the Cascade to, and that's what made this beer really stand out, both in a good way, but also in a surprising way that kind of often puts some people off. But it clearly had sort of, enough alluring aromas to it, which Cascade has, to really attract people. Particularly, we talk about it later, but in California, lots of great vineyards, lots of great wine drinkers, and that really helped the growth of craft in California because people were used to big, bold flavors and higher alcohols.
Yeah. So Matt, you've been doing quite a lot of in-person tastings with these beers. How have they been going? Sort of, what's your feelings on this beer?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I think the first thing was a project. It was such a big project. In fact, we actually, myself, Johnny, and Luke did one at London Craft Beer Festival on Friday. And we had half hour to try and fit in the history of the project, hops, and the beers.
People left drunk.
And every time I talk about it, and every time I chat to these guys, I learn something. And I think that's great. But also for me, that's craft beer in a nutshell, isn't it? So even though I'm hosting the tastings and doing these tastings, I'm learning something all the time. The project is so big that it's very kind of, it's quite a vast thing to try and explain in the shortest space of time. And I think it's been super, it's been so well received, especially when people when we name drop, I guess, some of the breweries we kind of work with, and then we were able to pick the brains. People are like, wow, that's cool. And I guess probably John, you'd be exactly the same. Like, you've learned tons of stuff. Everyone here has learned tons of stuff during the project, which is fantastic. And the beer's been super well received. I think people are a little bit shocked at how drinkable this beer is. As you said, Johnny, it's a 15-minute for a live tasting beer, but it's still got absolute bags of flavour. So yeah, it's been a super fun project to be involved in terms of touring around and trying to educate people about what we're trying to do.
Comment there from Joe, who says lovely drop. Is Sierra Nevada as fruity as this? Who's got the intimate knowledge of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale that would know to answer that?
I managed to get some fairly fresh pale ale, and we did a side by side. I haven't done it since we packaged it actually, but just when it was in fermenter. So one thing we did is we added close to double the amount of whole leaf hops to Sierra Nevada, which is still the least amount of hops in this project, but their equipment is set up so well to use whole leaf hops that yeah, we just decided to up it a bit. What we found is that our one had a bit more of a malt background. It's a bit more malty than their one, but the fruitiness is definitely coming through. Probably a bit more stronger now. I think it's almost kind of rounded out in the can and tasting a bit more fruity than it was maybe a couple of weeks ago, which is interesting.
Are you happy with where it's gone and where it's turned out from what you started to do? Like as a brewer, like is this the one you aimed for?
Yeah, I was interested to see how this one was received because it was Cascade is one of the original hops, and IPAs have moved on a lot and changed, and people are looking for more and more juicy IPAs. What was really interesting is how well this one's been received. A lot of brewers that I've drunk it with have really gone back to it, and yeah, I think it's turned out incredibly well, and yeah, very happy with it.
It's for me it's like nostalgia, because the way the sort of craft beer industry has moved on and everyone's drinking sort of pale, very hazy, very juicy beers. This feels like those sort of first few beers that you ever had, and it's that nostalgic level, but super fresh as well. It's delicious. Reiki, you're very quiet in the corner there, so tell me what you think.
This is the one I drunk probably the most of these beers. It's the first one I've had a can of, but I drunk a lot of it at your Time Hops Festival, Great British Beer Festival, and London Craft Beer Festival last week. And that's not just because it's the lower ABV. It does give you that lovely, warm, nostalgic feeling of the first time you discovered something that's just so different but so welcoming.
Yeah,
it's just the combination of the pale malt and the crystal is really lovely and warming.
Answers that question there.
But then the fact that it's just such a simple but uncomplicated beer, and the use, like Sean mentioned, it's whole leaf hops, and that's something a lot of brewers have kind of turned their back on. The fact that Sierra Nevada are still using those and you're producing such a great beer with that, it makes you kind of think about things slightly differently.
100%. So I'm going to turn this one to Luke. Benefits of whole leaf opposed to pellets or sort of other formats that you might use.
I think it's just down to the stylistic choices that the brewers want to make, really. I mean, whole leaf hops tend to be a little less intense, a little bit more subtle in how they're used. There's also just a difference in the way that you can use them as well. Like you can't throw these huge charges into the whirlpool, into the dry hop, because the nature of a dried out flower, it will soak up all of that beer. Whereas, I mean, that's kind of why pellets were developed, to kind of allow for that. But there's something that's quite romantic about whole leaf brewing as well. It's definitely, a lot of people have said in the comments, and a couple of people on the stream as well, that there's a real nostalgia with this as well, and I completely agree. I mean, this is really like the kind of beers that got me into drinking craft beer in the first place. It's that that little kind of subtle simplicity of this that you can get from whole leaf hops, and I think it's one of the things that makes Sierra Nevada such a romantic brewery for the beer industry as a whole as well. It's not just that the beers are incredible, it's that there's an incredible simplicity to what they do, and yet the end product is just as good as almost anyone on the planet.
Yeah. Sean, as a brewer, what's your take on it? Sort of what Luke said there, the romance and nostalgia of using whole leaf hops versus the sort of modern hop technology where you can get sort of maybe more punch, more flavor with less vegetation in the brew.
I think some breweries can't use pellets because they don't have a whirlpool or way to separate them. So whole leaf hops is the only way. Some people are forced to do it, and what has tend to happen is people have, as they've grown or got a new brew house, and they've tried to move away from whole leaf hops, which is what's really interesting to see Sierra Nevada sticking to it. And I've been speaking to brewers recently quite a lot, and also seen other brewers in the States still going back to using whole leaf hops. I think in West Coast, they're looking to do a brewery that we collabed with recently. We used whole leaf hop as well. In the West Coast, we did, just to kind of get that more, the green and the pine kind of flavors from the hops in there. So I think it's definitely going to stick around, and I think we'll look to use them in more efficient ways.
Excellent. And was there any dry hopping, or was that all in the boil? We
did a small dry hop at the end of fermentation just to kind of help with the aroma, because of Sierra Nevada having much better equipment to extract aroma. So we did that to try to get it closer to their beer, and that was from tasting their beer alongside ours.
Fair play. Anyone else want to say anything about this beer or Cascade as a hop?
I had some points. Yeah. The first thing I want to talk about is, like, lots of people have been saying, and we've been saying, that it's incredibly drinkable, and I think there's lots of reasons for that. One is what you get with West Coast beers, which is this kind of collision of sweetness and bitterness. Whereas in, say, New England, you're trying to avoid bitterness. You don't get this kind of bittersweet. It, like, for me on the palate, it is literally like a collision. It's like you get sweetness and bitterness at the same time. Like if you've burnt a little bit of caramel or something like that, which is, it appeals to us, like the caveman in us, through the Maillard reaction, which is sort of the browning of meat that humans from an evolutionary standpoint find incredibly appealing. So you get that with West Coast. We sort of lost that when we go for these really juicy aromas. The other thing to mention about drinkability is if you're going to use whole leaf, you're going to get significantly less actual oil content probably into your beer. And oil content is wonderful if you want big, sticky, thick, with 3 C's kind of mouthfeel. And that's what we want in, say, Double New England. But it's not what we want in, say, a 5.6% American Pale necessarily. And so the drinkability is massively raised by the fact that A, this beer is quite dry, B, it's got that collision, and C, it's got significantly less oil compared to the other stuff that's in there. So it feels less sticky on the palate, and you want to neck it a little bit more. So people will talk about hops as being aroma and flavor. It's also a huge amount of the texture of the beers that we have, and people often forget that.
Yeah. Interesting comment from Andy here, who's watching this instead of celebrating with his mum. But the beer's been very well received, but possibly almost impossible to sell nowadays without the stories and the project behind it. Johnny, you know beer. Do you agree with that? Do you think it would be a difficult beer to sell without this project?
Oh man, I mean, if you tried to make this a core product, it would be like your salespeople would never forgive you. Like there's just not the volume for this kind of thing anymore, which is really sad. And it takes a brewery like Sierra Nevada that's got that story kind of almost written into every beer that they produce. Even when they produce a new beer like Hazy Little Thing, you still feel like it's historical. And it's a wonderful thing for a brand to have. But for Siren, as a young brewery producing a beer that was sort of a beer style that was made before you guys existed, doesn't feel like a story. So this was a great opportunity to do that. But I do think that, like we said, whole hops might get a bit more use in the future, because we're starting to discover that more oil, more aroma isn't always right for the thing you're trying to make, or isn't always right for drinkability. We might start to see a slight return to that and a slight return to drinkability. But that'll be slow going. So yeah, Andy's 100% right.
Good times. All right, chaps, should we move on to the next beer, which I believe is the Centennial. I'm going to shut the door behind me because the wind is blowing, and I'm going to bring Dolly to join us. Okay. Those of you at home, Centennial.
If you click, wait, two guys. If you point your phone at that QR code, what happens, Tim?
Does it take us to your documentary?
I hope so. It didn't work on Saturday, so I hope it does.
It should take you to the Siren Craft Brew Time Hops page which now has your documentary on it, which I did for you on Saturday.
Sorry, man. Thank you.
It was a pretty swift resolution, Johnny. You said it doesn't work. I messaged him, and it worked within a minute.
There you go.
Efficiency.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
It really does.
Or it says something about my weekends. There we go. So another sort of another beer that I would, it's that sort of gorgeous, absolutely deep caramel color. So Sean, just give us a little bit of background on where this one came from, why the Bear Republic beer was chosen, why Racer 5.
Darren and I had a conversation, both of us, when we were thinking about the next beer, and we linked into Racer 5. We knew Centennial was in it. I remember drinking it. I'd only been brewing a couple of years, I think, and just been blown away by the amount of flavor in a bottle of beer like that. And Darren, at a similar time, was on the way to craft beer conference in the States, and first beer he had after he landed was Racer 5, and kind of we both had good experiences with it, so thought that was definitely the beer we wanted to brew with us. We reached out to them and they got back to us. So Peter Kruger was in the documentary with Johnny, but Peter linked me with a master brewer, a guy called Roger, who was really good, and sent me a bunch of information that helped develop the recipe. There was a lot of information out they'd released a homebrew recipe for this and a few other things. So it was good to look at that, go to them with the recipe, and then they picked it apart and helped us with it. One of the really interesting things is their water profile that they have as a base water is pretty much the same as what our water treatment system creates. It's almost identical. So we went with exactly their water pro, their salts, where they add and how they add them, which was half in the mash and half in the kettle, which we normally put most of our salts in the mash. So although we have put salts in the kettle before, it was interesting to follow exactly what they did. We also looked at how we layered in the other hops. So the other thing with this project, which we haven't talked about, they're not single hop beers necessarily. Cascade was a single hop because that's a Sierra Nevada brew. This beer has other hops laid in, and it was interesting to play. They talk about Centennial being the kind of key hop in it, and then how they play around with the other hops. And it was balancing Columbus as long as you got the right Columbus. And our profile that we had for the Columbus we had didn't match, so we actually used a bit of Amarillo, which is what they do. And so we talked a lot about hop profiles and how those work together. We put 75 IBUs in this, which was split between the beginning of the boil and late in the boil. And then just some big dry hops with Centennial being the big hop there.
Luke, on to you then. Let's talk about Centennial.
Yeah, so this is Centennial's a big step up from Cascade, and it was another big kind of game changer hop. It's another great one to showcase kind of immediately after Cascade. I think a lot of beer drinkers are familiar with the term the C hops, and it kind of refers to those like 70s, 80s, big, powerful, your Chinooks, Cascades, like Columbus Centennials, the big kind of powerhouse, bitter, pithy, resinous hops that are like quintessentially American. And Centennial was another one that came out of the USDA breeding program. So it was developed quite early. It was developed in like the mid to late 70s. I can't remember the year exactly, but it took a little while to come through that breeding program. It was another one that had been kind of almost suppressed within that breeding program of it's too expressive. It's way too much. It was kind of further than a lot of brewers at that time were prepared to go for. So Centennial didn't release until like 1990, if I'm remembering correctly. It's the very early 90s, if it wasn't 1990. And it kind of allowed a lot of the brewers that were spurred on to start brewing by Sierra Nevada Pale and some of those very early beers to really make that jump up. And you can kind of tell in the ABV jump from the first beer to this beer, this wouldn't really have been possible with Cascade. It needed something that's got that extra bit of bitterness, that's got that extra kind of whack of lemon rind in there, that extra like real sticky pine sap thing that Centennial does better than just about anything else. And it allowed for the higher end of hoppy IPAs that kind of became the quintessential, like the California style West Coast IPA. I mean, Racer 5 is one of my favorite beers on the planet as well. And it's one of the beers that defined that style. It's there's like 2 or 3 other things that would throw into that as well. But they're all beers from the 90s that set what we kind of think of in the UK, at least, and I think for a lot of the world, as being what an American IPA should be. And it's the higher ABV, it's the higher IBUs, it's the higher hopping rates, and just that big kind of pithy bitterness to it as well. One thing that I will say for hops like Cascade and hops like Centennial, the history of them goes back to some of the British aroma hops as well. So both Cascade and Centennial have got a Fuggle derivative in them as well. A lot of people like to kind of laugh at some of the traditional British beers, but there's both Fuggle's genetics and Golding genetics that went into what eventually became Centennial.
I love
and
that.
it is really that the American brewing process trying to hit those kind of punchy. I mean, this is like quintessential dual purpose hop, I suppose, and it's kind of what later became known as dual purpose hop, and it's almost what kind of defined the style for it. Of it's a great aroma hop, but it still was bred initially for that big kind of whack of bittering in there. And yeah, I think this beer is fantastic.
Good times. And to you, Johnny, you spent some time talking to the guys in Bear Republic.
Yeah, Bear Republic was one of me and Brad, my co-hosts, entrances into craft beer. So we had Racer 5 really early on, and Red Rocket Ale as well, which is a brilliant red. Well, they called it a red ale, but it'd definitely be a red IPA now.
Racer 5s actually came across because it was meant to be Red Rocket, right? But it was hopped wrong, so they just sort of went with it.
It was Red Rocket Ale, but
I believe so.
Right.
I believe
there
so.
You go. I didn't know that. Yeah, so we made a film with them back in 2016 at the original brew pub where those beers were created, and sadly that brew pub's now closed because some dickhead jacked up the rents. And it was no longer profitable. But it's what I love to talk about, sort of these original American craft breweries. Yeah, me too. As sort of like a bit like the British real ale breweries. Like we always think of them as like super modern and exciting, but actually these were the OGs of a brewing scene in the States, much like, say, I don't know, Timothy Taylor and also all of these were. So super old school branding. I love this guy too. No, wait, not Matt. The other guy. I love you, Matt. Oh, God. Why can't I work out what side is what? I love you both. So going there was a real pilgrimage for us to try those beers. And Racer 5 is... I remember, actually, I was with Paul from Cloudwater when we went. And he was like, oh, that's too sweet. Like, too much crystal. I think too much of that kind of pine resin kind of thing for him back then. Me and Brad were like, that's the exact fucking reason that we love it. It's that interaction of that sticky resin, lots of kind of caramel from the malts, and exactly the kind of stuff that defines classic American IPAs, but equally is the complete antithesis of where IPAs have gone. So, this beer, I think, is almost perfect. It's a really great homage to that beer. But Racer 5 probably has even more caramel to it. It's even stickier. And, I wish there were more beers like that. But I'm also kind of glad there aren't, because Racer 5 is a really unique and special beer that, perhaps comes from the fact that half of the grain bill was designed for a red ale, not an IPA.
Yeah. So, Sean, you mentioned water earlier, and obviously these beers are sort of American beers, Californian beers. Finch Hampstead has a very different water profile. The brewery has a very different water profile to these sort of, different countries, different areas. How important is that when you're trying to recreate a beer to sort of think about that water profile?
Well, now that we understand water a lot better, we can manipulate it pretty well. We got lots of salts and minerals we can add to manipulate it. The key thing is your base water. So if your base water is really hard and you've got a lot of calcium in it, you're already limited to what you can add. Same with the other ions. And so we're lucky enough that we can soften our water massively because we've got really hard water we need to, and then we can build it back up. And playing around with different salts, sulfates and your chloride ratio is really important for different beer styles, and being able to play around with that and manipulate that is really important. I don't know if you've got anything to touch on that, Reiki, with homebrewing and.
Yeah, I mean, as a homebrewer, you can either. Well, I've got really hard water, pretty much kind of Thames water for all of us down the M4 corridor. You can either dilute it back with bottled water. A lot of homebrewers will use Tesco's Ashbet water to dilute it back if they've got hard water. Or you can go RO or even spotless water. You can find those around the country where you can get RO water, which is basically what the window cleaners are using. And a lot of homebrewers are using that. So we find different ways to adapt our water when we're in the homebrew. I mean, I love this beer, though, I've got to say. It's a beer that could get you into a lot of trouble. And like everyone else has said, Racer 5 was one of those beers that kind of got me into kind of craft beer. I have many happy memories of going to Cottage Wines and picking up cans and bottles of that. But then also Two Hearted was again, it was that kind of piney, that resinous. Centennial is just one of those upside door. So this beer is just, I could drink a lot of this and get into a lot of trouble.
Big shout out to Cottage Wines there. I love that. Question from Adrian Kirk here about the label designs. Obviously, very big departure from our sort of normal thing. Whenever we do sort of a series of beers like this, which is outside of what we normally do, then we work with our designer Will Parr to sort of do different things. And Andy's replied in the comment here, and I'll put Andy's comment up, but it really is all about storytelling. And so when we were looking at the history of the hops, that's why we wanted to work with Yakima Chief. That's why we wanted to work with these breweries, for Sean and the brew team to sort of get those storytelling. That's also why we teamed up with Johnny and Brad at the Craft Beer Channel, or Jay and Silent Bob, to really help tell those stories and put that across. And Will picked up on that, our designer, and created these labels. So there's loads of subtle little touches on these labels that sort of nod towards the breweries and the beers behind them. So have a look out for all of those and try and work them out. But yeah, we're super happy with these labels, and it's nice to do something a bit different. Clerks 3 out in October on Craft Beer Channel. So where can people get Racer 5 in the UK?
I haven't seen it for ages.
Where was I? I was speaking to somebody about this, and they said that hopefully, well, maybe it was when I was speaking to Peter, but I feel like it was in person. They are looking at ways to bring it over. So it's currently brought over by a wine importer mostly, I think. So it's just sort of shoved onto a pallet of American wine. But I think hopefully more will be coming, and if it does, snap it up, because it's it never had hype, I think, because it's brewed in practically the same town as Pliny. They are about a 20-minute drive apart, and I think that maybe that meant that just all the plaudits and the attention went to Russian River. But it's an absolutely stunning beer. And it really doesn't get enough love or enough plaudits for what it did for the industry. So yeah, if it does come back, you've got to get hold of it and give it a go. Or if you ever go to Russian River, go a little bit north and go see Bear Republic.
Touching on the points that was made earlier with the Cascade and maybe not being completely sellable, what do you think about this in the modern market as far as that sort of big bitter West Coast goes?
I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting what other people think, but I don't think the West Coast is ever going to come back in the way. I think New England has too much of sort of a grip over the IPA category, and I think a lot of people coming in now expect haze and juice and low bitterness from their IPAs. But I do think that it is going to grow a little bit more. People are going to get more interested in that balance, in that collision of flavor, and in that drinkability that comes with these kind of recipes. What I would really expect, and what we've already seen from beers, without wanting to name that brewery up north of the border, but their 5.4% IPA, whatever it is, keeps going down. But these kind of beers, there's an opportunity. I think they're going forward. So one of these styles, I hope, will kick off again. And it's interesting to see almost 4 different versions of it. Maybe it's the sort of mountain style, the Midwest style, the Alchemist style that might get some real traction culturally.
I don't think it's just the beer style that's the tasting beer that's changed. I mean, the grist has changed. This has got caramel malt in, Sean.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I mean, most breweries now doing West Coast are not using caramel malt. They're using Munich or Vienna. So the grist has changed massively in today's world to compare to when these beers were brewed.
Yeah, I'll touch on that when we drink Simcoe, because it's a big part of that beer.
And Matt, how has this gone down for you in the tastings?
Yeah, this has been the most interesting one of them all, because we'll get on to the next 2 in a minute, but I think probably the next 2 we're going to drink, one of them we can see why people have liked it just from the colour, and then the other one we know why people like it just for the association. But it was this one that I think has split the crowds, but I think people have really surprised themselves that they've liked it. And I think, kind of touching on what Johnny said, I think West Coast does, from my perspective, seem to be having somewhat of a revival, but I don't think it's ever, it's never going to overtake the New England style. Or at least, we never know. I haven't got a crystal ball, but it seems to be going that way. But this seems to be the beer that people have really enjoyed, because it is so incredibly balanced. And I think people, especially at London Craft Beer Festival, the first sip, you can see in their face that they're not sure if they like it, but then they go in for another, and then another, and then they kind of they look at you and go, "That's really good," and then walk off. So it's such an interesting beer, because I think they look at it and they think, "That's not hazy. I'm not gonna like that," but they really do. And it's been one of the the most popular beers, I think. And I think from the tastings that we did at LCBF, and even Great British Beer Festival, went down super well. But then maybe that was just Reiki drinking it all, I don't know.
Just coming up in disguises going, I really like this beer.
It's an absolute Homer Simpson moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is really interesting. So I think the sort of the scene has gone very juicy and very sort of hazy, but I'm pretty guilty of that myself. And a sort of hazy, juicy, low ABV session IPA, which does exist, is my absolute go-to. Sean, when we did Long Beach on the map the other day, I took them home and I had like 3 or 4 in a row, and I was like, man, I really love this West Coast style. I think when you actually really just drop onto it, it's like, yeah, this is stunning, because it's so much cleaner and you can really taste the beer and taste that bitterness. And I love that. I love it. And I think this is great. And I think it really shines.
I think for the ABV, the strengths and all that, it's superbly drinkable. And that's what people have really found, from it. A gentleman at London Craft Beer Festival found it out quite quickly. But it's superbly drinkable, and I think that's what maybe catches people out or surprises people.
I think it's also worth noting an interesting quirk again of humanity is that we actually bitterness is a sign of poison, right? Our palates are tuned to pick out bitterness because a lot of poisons are bitter. So when we drink something bitter, we're not designed to like it. We're designed to want to spit it out. And it gives us a little adrenaline rush because our body's like, well, hang on a minute. Have I just poisoned myself? So there's a little thrill to it, which I think might explain why when Matt was pouring it for these people, they're like, I'm not sure about that. And then suddenly you're like, oh wait, I've got adrenaline. It was a surprise. I'm looking for experiences. I'm at a beer festival and something like, I'm starting to enjoy this. And then, it's like spicy food as well. Like the first time you bite it, you're like, oh my God, this is hot. And then you start to really enjoy it. And then obviously it all goes wrong when you start sweating from your eyes. I mean, crying, really. You're mostly crying. So, there's something really thrilling about a beer like this. And we said in the documentary, like when Brad and I were drinking it, like Brad said, it kind of took my breath away the first sip that we had because it was so bitter. And then it just mellows out completely as you adjust and you get used to it. And our taste buds equally, taste buds are amazing things. So they'll sit on the surface of your tongue, just above the surface of your tongue, waiting for flavors that they can pick up on. And when they pick up lots of a certain flavor, they duck back down. And that's because it's trying to taste everything else. So it's why if you brush your teeth and then have something really sweet, or if you have something really, really sweet, everything else tastes bitter. If you've ever had a beer with pudding, that beer suddenly tastes really bitter. And that's because those taste buds that detect that have ducked down, right? So they can taste kind of everything else. So when you're drinking a really bitter beer, you get used to it really quite quickly because those sensor cells are ducking out of the way so that it can taste sweetness, umami, salt, everything else. So it's always going to slap you around the chops, and then you'll be like, actually, this is great.
Yeah. Matthew, I agree with your comment, and most of our beers in supermarkets are actually sort of on that sort of way, so look out for them. Last time I was sat here doing a live tasting with Siren, we were pairing cheese, and I was just going to say this beer was absolutely made for a really strong, sharp cheddar.
Amen. Bitterness and cheddar. Hell yeah.
I'm waiting for you to lift the plate up.
I know. I'm so annoyed I haven't thought this through and I've got it ready. Just to sort of go, hey guys, do you all have cheese?
Bitterness and Cheddar sounds like the debut album for the Craft Beer Channel.
We're working on the debut. Yeah, don't you worry about it.
It's Johnny and Brad pseudonyms, right?
Say what?
It's your pseudonyms, you and Brad. I'm not entirely sure who's Cheddar.
Let's move on to our third beer.
It's
a shame to say goodbye to this.
Which is Citra and Mosaic.
Are we doing this non-chronological?
We are doing this in strength order. Which way do you want to go, Johnny? You choose.
No, don't. No. I'm just surprised. I'm pleased and surprised. You said we got the documentary in the wrong order.
No, I don't. I think you did the documentary in the right order. It's just that I've done all of the booklets and stuff in strength order. No, I haven't. Centennial stronger. There you go. I've done it in whatever order I want, apparently.
In the right.
But this one is something different because this is a hazy, juicy number. Look at that. A glorious looking bit. And again, if we're looking at the label, we've got an old hop threshing machine there. We've got the Alchemist graphics with focal banger. And we've got some other things like we've got wings. So yeah, look out for that. Sean, talk to us about this beer. Why did we choose Citra and Mosaic? Pretty obvious, I think, but how did it come about for this for focal banger?
So this was a really interesting one thing I haven't mentioned about this project for us and the brew team is we got to speak to these brewers and find out how they make their beers and what we can do to kind of make a beer similar to them. And there's quite a lot of new techniques or different techniques to what we do that we've found out about. And this was one where Johnny's linked us up with John from The Alchemist, which was great. And I got to email him a bunch of questions after doing quite a lot of research on this beer. Because if I'm honest, I haven't actually had focal banger before. So if anyone brings a can,
you got so close, Sean. Honestly, this is the closest of the four. It's amazing.
Yeah. So I did a lot of reading and research on this and went to John with a bunch of questions, and he came back with answering every single one of them. It was incredible. And this is what I love about the brewing industry is we do like to share, and we're open to sharing ideas and techniques. And he's just got a wealth of knowledge. And what I love about him is he does things the way he likes to do it. He says, in his opinion, a lot. I think you might have picked that up, Johnny. So he's not saying he's right. It's how he likes to do it and how he likes to make the beer. And the real interesting thing with this is once he answered all my questions, I would never have made a beer like this way, because it was quite different to what we've done in the past and how we've done things. And because of this project, we're going the way he's told us to do it, and let's see how this turned out. And for me, this is the beer that turned out the best in the project. And I learned so much from it, which was incredible. But for example, one of the big things he tells us is he only uses barley. He doesn't put any wheat or any oats in this beer. And the haze is stable. The yeast, we used his yeast. He told us a few things about his yeast. He says, make sure you don't use it on the first generation for this beer. So we did a suspended with his yeast before, and then cropped that and used that second generation. And I think all these things really came together really nicely. Yeah, I'm just really happy with this beer. So
if I send you an email like that, Sean, are you going to share all the details with me?
I'll share what I can for sure. which is there's a few things he hasn't really said keep a secret, but yeah, I'll definitely tell you what we've done, and you can have a go at it.
Yeah, I mean, it was Johnny said this is the one you got closest on. It is, and I've had Focal Bang. It is, and I've got real good memories of time hops a few weeks ago. You could spot people in the room who were drinking this. Well, you didn't even have to spot them; you could smell them because the aroma from the glass on this beer is just outstanding.
Yeah, yeah, it was great.
Sean, you said that with the conversations you had with the Alchemist that you've just been talking about, that you're probably going to change the way you now brew sort of New England style beers from now on.
I think I'm going to take things from every beer we've done in this project and put them together and try different things. And what's great is you make a beer, you brew it, and 2 to 3 weeks later you get to taste it and you learn what that did and how it affected the flavor, and then you do that again, and we keep evolving and learning. I definitely think I'm going to take a lot of techniques from this forward for sure. But there's a bit of bitterness in this. Like, we brewed it with about 80 IBUs, which is where about he sits with it. And I think bitterness with this kind of softer mouthfeel works, but the reason he doesn't want wheat and oats in his grist is he wants the beer to finish crisp, an IPA. He doesn't want oats giving the silky mouthfeel necessarily in an IPA, and he doesn't want wheat giving a bready flavor, which can be good in some IPAs and can work. It's just what he likes to do, and I really like the idea of it finishing crisp, and the bitterness being there really helps with that. So
how is IBU measured, Sean?
There's a standard method that uses a spectrophotometer, and you're measuring basically alpha acids that are isomerized, and it's the amount that's in there. But bitterness itself is now being looked at quite differently with the amount of dry hopping that's happening. There are other compounds that actually add bitterness and astringency that can be measured with much more advanced equipment. So we can measure traditional bitterness, but it uses spectrophotometry, so it needs a light to pass through it. So with hazy beers, it's becoming harder and harder to do accurate IBUs with that. That's probably more information than was requested, but yeah, basically that's it.
It's good.
All right. Sorry, a quick question for Sean, just on that. You mentioned the IBUs in this beer. How many IBUs would you generally find in like a super modern, like New England? Like if you're trying to aim for one of these super kind of sweet, big kind of juicy New England, how many IBUs would you technically aim for in those?
I think it depends on a few things. Like it's thinking about balancing the sweetness, how much your hops are going to contribute to bitterness that you're dry hopping with. So anything from 10 IBUs up to 45. But your alcohol is going to add a sweetness to your body, and the higher you go with ABV, generally, the more you need to add. You want to make it balanced and drinkable. You don't want it to be too sweet. So it's dependent on the beer that you're actually making.
Sean, another question for you here. I know we were having debates at the start as to whether it was going to be Focal Banger or Heady Topper that we were using as this sort of inspiration beer. What was the reason for Focal Banger instead of Heady Topper?
It was Citra and Mosaic. So they were the hops used in it, and it's the only hops we've used in it. And, it's quite iconic for that. We were looking at it, this one, suddenly the amount of breweries opened up much more than the beginning of the project. We were looking at Cascade. It's obviously got to go with Sierra. And then, this opened up a lot more options for us and finding the right one. And with Johnny being involved in the connection he already had there, I've actually had Heady. I haven't had Focal Banger. And the comments from almost everyone we've spoken to is Heady Top is the one that they produce the most of, but Focal Banger is better. So, off that is kind of,
Yeah, before I get into that, I'll say I've got two favorite IPAs in the world. It's Swami by Pizza Port, and it's Focal Banger by The Alchemist. So very much to back up what Sean was saying there, like Heady's a great beer, but Focal Banger it's a banger. It's wonderful. And like Johnny said, is incredibly close.
Yeah, I was going to say, like as Johnny said, do you as a fan of this beer, do you think it's been hit the target?
Yeah, it's so close. It's so close. It's a really good job with balancing the hops in there and the yeast profile as well. Like outside of my professional hop life, I get very nerdy about yeasts as well. And the house yeast at The Alchemist is incredibly expressive and very, very unique. And it contributes so much to the aroma of Alchemist beers. And I think that, for me, is the reason why this has got so close to Focal. It's that kind of balance in with the Citra Mosaic that I think most people are super aware of aroma-wise these days. But there's just that ever so slight kind of peachiness that you get from the yeast that's very, very unique to this strain for me. And that's the thing that ticks the box for me on this one.
Excellent.
But yeah, I mean, talking about Citra Mosaic, it's difficult to talk about the last 10 years of craft beer without talking about Citra Mosaic. I mean, they dominate the market. I mean, Yakima Chief, we are probably the largest single grower we're a network of grower-owned farms, but Yakima Chief as an entity is probably the largest single grower in the States. Citra is by far the hop that we grow the most of. It really has been. It's another one like Cascade that completely changed the market with the way it is. It's the hop that tipped the scale of, and Johnny goes into this beautifully in the documentary as well, but it is really the hop that tips the scale between the alpha and the aroma variety shift with American hops. It's the two hops in here being Citra and Mosaic are real triumphs of private breeding, as opposed to we looked at the kind of some of the biggest triumphs of public breeding as well. So both Citra and Mosaic released from the Hop Breeding Company, which is it's a two hop companies went into it as a joint venture, as a breeding program. One half of it being Yakima Chief Ranches, which is the sister company for Yakima Chief Hops, and the other being John I. Haas in also in Yakima. And the story of these two hops is the stories of kind of the two halves of that breeding program as well. There's a great little kind of quirk around Citra that Citra almost never made it to market. Citra almost never got released. It almost didn't make it out of that breeding program whatsoever. I mean, Citra was was first crossed fairly early on, and it was discounted as being too expressive. Again, I mean, that's kind of a story we talked about a little bit with some of the hops earlier. This was really this was canned as a hop. And there's a guy called, and apologies if I pronounced the surname wrong, is Gene Probosco or Probesco. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But it's Gene who, from the John I. Hart breeding program, that basically just personally championed this hop and kept it going and kept it going and kept it going until 2007. When Citra was kind of released into the wild, or released into the market, I should say, for brewers to start using it. And it really did take that kind of period of time for the brewing industry to get to a point where something that's as expressive as Citra was acceptable, I think is the big thing. It was very much just like, that's kind of crazy. No one's going to want that. But then Citra... And I saw someone give a shout out to Oakham Citra earlier on in the comments on this one. Oakham Citra was the first brew in the UK with Citra in it that was followed by a matter of weeks by Fine Ales Jarl, and those two have kind of been duking it out for who brewed the first Citra beer. But it's Oakham by a hair, as far as I'm aware. But both their beers are incredible, and they're still incredible to this day, which is kind of a testament to those brewers and a testament to Citra as it is now. I mean, they've been in the market for 50 years for beers like this, or not beers like this, but beers with these hops in them. Then Mosaic was a little bit further down the line than Citra. Mosaic came out in 2012, and when Mosaic was first released, Mosaic and Citra both kind of predate beers that look like this as well, I would say. And Mosaic was, Citra very nearly didn't make it. It's one man's dedication is Citra, and it's the same story with Simcoe, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But it very much, Citra and Mosaic came from a world of bitter IPAs. I mean, that the Centennial is kind of what we should be thinking about when these hops were first bred. From a hop breeding company perspective, it takes somewhere between 10 and 15 years from an original cross being made to that hop being released. So Mosaic coming out in 2012, Mosaic was bred in the late 90s. So it was bred less than a decade after Centennial was first released. So it shows the foresight of some of the breeders. Definitely shout out to y'all. And Mosaic was bred by a man called Jason Perrault from Perrault Farms, one of the 3 founding farms of Yakima Chief and the kind of cornerstone of Yakima Chief Francis. And it was brought to market with an idea of making something super expressive for West Coast style beers originally. And it just so happened that the merger of these 2 varieties together, the flavors that are displayed, that kind of the really beautiful, bright citrus peachiness that you get from Citra, and then that dank kind of tropical. I always get like overripe melons from good Mosaic, and this is very good Mosaic in this. And they kind of came together and built a flavor profile that is what's in everyone's glass at the moment. It kind of helped to define the New England style. And I don't think either of these 2 hops would have been as successful were it not for New England IPAs, but I also don't think New England IPAs could have been successful were it not for these 2 hop varieties, and specifically the aromas you get with these 2 varieties together. There's few and far between beers that have kind of bowled people over in the last 5-6 years in the UK, and probably the last 10 years globally, that haven't got one, if not both of these 2 hops together. And again, it kind of comes down to parentage. The history of and the parentage of Citra has never really been disclosed, but it's a nice way of talking about with Mosaic, Mosaic's mother is Simcoe, which we'll go on to a little bit in the next beer. And the male line from Mosaic is a derivative of Nugget, which again takes us back to way back to the very beginnings of kind of the Yakima Valley and Pacific Northwest hop growing, really. So yeah, it's kind of Mosaic is a perfect kind of circular. This is the Pacific Northwest, effectively, and yeah, they work incredibly well together, and I think this beer's nailed it.
Luke, doesn't Citra have like Metal Fair and East Kent Golden's lineage?
I don't think anything's been officially talked about it, but there is lineage from Germany would be my assumption in there, definitely. Just because of the heavy ties with John Haas to Germany as well. There's a lot of kind of cross-pollination of stuff going backwards and forwards from there. But yeah, the full parentage hasn't been disclosed to my knowledge, at least.
Shout out to Luke for that hot passion. Absolutely stunning. Like, yeah.
Wait, I guess talking about Simcoe.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. Anyone that can talk passionately about anything, but hops in particular, beautiful. I love it. All right. So we've Luke mentioned there, Citra Mosaic, like influenced New England IPA, and New England IPA wouldn't. Can anyone hear the fireworks? By the way, someone's got fireworks outside my house.
It's not Andy's mum's birthday popping off, is it?
That's the birthday fireworks. And New England IPA wouldn't be a thing without these two hops. Johnny, how do you feel about that comment? Do you agree with that?
Oh, it's totally true. So I've just finished working. It's just been released a book called The World's Greatest Beers, in which me and seven better beer writers put a book together of the 250 best beers. And if you look at the IPAs that made the cut, so many of them are Citra Mosaic beers. For my, actually, I only put one in. No, sorry, I put two in, because I put Focal Banger in and I put Treehouse Julius, which are both Citra Mosaic beers. And then there's so many others. You know, if you've ever had Garage Soup, most of the Verdant beers like either have one or the other of them in there. Certainly their early beers. You know, it was kind of an easy bet. You know, these hops play together so incredibly well because you've got, you know, we know what Citra smells like. Citra, its aroma is so unique, and that's why it's so special that you can almost go, well, that's Citra. It's one of those hops when you smell it. It's almost, 10 years ago, I remember getting into beer, and it was like, now people go like, oh, Sabro. It was like that with Citra. You'd sniff a beer and go, well, there's Citra in that, because it was so unique. And now it's sort of, lots of Citra wannabes, not wannabes because they've all got their own character as well, but, Citra has literally bred and metaphorically bred lots of other hops that are very similar. I'm not sure whether Sabro will quite have that longevity, but it very much was very unique in the aromas that it has. And then Mosaic, again, was also like that, but in particular because it can get very dank. I saw in the comments somebody say, does Focal Banger have that hint of onion to it as well? And they're like, yeah. Oh, yeah. It has all the funk to it as well. These are wild plants that are full of all kinds of different essential oils that smell of lots of different things. And the interesting thing from the documentary we made was John saying that he looks to express the hops. He's not going, I want orange, so I need these hops. He's going, I want Mosaic, so I need this pick of Mosaic. So he's going and then just going, whatever Mosaic absolutely fucking pops, I'm going to use that variety. So it's a slightly different approach that lots of other brewers have, but, a lot of core beers can't have that. Soundwave will have a profile you guys try to hit at Siren, whereas your seasonal should be like, well, I want to produce this. I want to use these hops or create this kind of aroma. So yeah, Citra Mosaic is what New England IPA was built on, 100%. And I mean, we did it. So we recently did a homebrew in which we teamed up with Cloudwater to do a double New England IPA on the kit behind me. And we did Citra Mosaic and then added nuance with a little bit of Amarillo and lots and lots of Motueka to try and make a bit of nuance so it didn't smell like every other IPA out there, because that's what, if you smell an IPA, or you think of what an IPA smells like, you're thinking probably of Citra, Mosaic, and either Verdant Yeast or London Ale 3. And what I love about this beer is that it's there could be potential lineage to London Ale 3 between the Alchemist strain. We're using Citra Mosaic here, and yet it smells unlike anything else. It tastes unlike anything else. It feels unlike anything else because of that lack of barley and oats. So the really amazing thing and why I love beer is, there's hundreds of Citra Mosaic beers out there. There's about 15 Citra Mosaic beers in that book I mentioned, and yet this one stands out from all of them because of the hop selection and the processes that we use. That hopefully, I don't know, maybe after this, Sean's going to tell me everything, but he can tell you guys what he can.
Sean, take it away.
Johnny, we can chat. But yeah, I think it's yeast is such an important flavor contributor to flavor in beer. The interesting thing, we called this project Time Hops, and we based it around hops, but the information I was getting from brewers was all the ingredients to recreate. It wasn't just what you do with the hops. It was how they dry hop, how they mash in, what's their water to grist ratio in their mashes was quite an interesting thing to play around with. And also our equipment's all different. So, that's another big thing that's going to always have a difference in us copying a recipe or getting all the information we can. Your equipment is going to make a difference. The other thing we did different to this beer is we didn't centrifuge it, which all our other beers are centrifuged to help us flavor. And it's something we'll look at. One of the reasons we didn't centrifuge it is John believes if beer goes through pumps post brew house, they can damage the oil, the impellers. And so we wanted to try stick to that as well. And I think it was an interesting thing. We still got repeating that.
Beer is crazy, right? Like, you can put the same recipe to 100 brewers and they'll come out with a different beer because of mad little shit like that. Like this crazy tiny little tweaks that people make. Like in cycling, it's called marginal gains. Like it's 1% difference makes all the difference. And it's like minimizing the amount of pipes it goes through. Make a difference to the beer.
We've done a couple of collabs where it's the same recipe in two different breweries. We did one with Harbour doing a cold IPA. But we used two different yeasts. I think they used a lager yeast and we used an ale yeast, or the other way around, Sean. I can't remember. But the two beers turned out completely different with the same malt bill, the same, just the yeast different. But you could use the same yeast, and the two different brew houses would create two different beers. It's insane, and that is what's great. And that's what's fun, I think, about this project, about trying to not recreate, but do tributes to these beers in our brew house. And that was the challenge to Sean. So I'm sure it's good for Sean to hear that, he's pretty much nailed it with this.
There's so many variables in there when you're trying to clone a beer. Everything from the brew kit, the people brewing it, the water, the time of day, the time of year.
Yeah.
It's virtually impossible. I mean, that's kind of why we find that we get a lot of breweries willing to share things with us, because you're never going to perfectly match it. Yeah. Although based on this, Sean, you can come and work for us and do some more clone recipes.
We've had quite a lot of people asking for recipes for beers that have 72 hours spent in the spin bot or whatever. It's like we can give you a homebrew recipe for this, but you're never ever going to be able to recreate this beer.
But sometimes homebrewers love that challenge. It's kind of like, well, I'm going to find the best way to create the closest thing I can get.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of like how Sean says he's learned so many different techniques from these beers and this project that he's going to try and take on. That's what homebrewers love about just getting the information, that those few little nuggets. So Sean can tell me the mash profile that he's used on this, and he's already given me a hint in terms of what hops are used hot side and what's used cold side. We can get there slowly.
Yeah.
So Matt, in your tastings that you've done with people, obviously this is the beer from the set. But if we're talking about what Andy spoke about earlier, the sort of sellability, this is probably the most sellable beer of the set because it's hazy and it's that sort of juicy level. How's it been going down for you in the tastings?
Yeah, I think this is probably the beer that people got most excited about just because of the way it pours. I actually specifically remember when we did the tasting on Saturday, Johnny, and you pouring out, and everyone was like getting almost giddy with excitement because as soon as they saw the colour, they knew what they were in for. But then also on the converse, the slight look of confusion on some people. It's bitter. It's a New England IPA and it's bitter. And I'll go back to the comment from Dr. Sam. I think kind of nail on the head there. It's like a classy beer. It's like a classy New England IPA because it is like so very balanced. But 100%, people saw the colour, they got super excited about it, just purely because of that. But also appreciate it for the beer it is, not just because it was that hazy and that kind of like juicy beer. It was the fact that it actually was also really flavoursome but incredibly well balanced. I think that a few people surprised themselves when drinking it that the beer or this style of beer could taste that kind of way. I don't know if that came across with you, Johnny, when we did the tastings, but there was the excitement, the slight confusion, and then the excitement came back, and and then when we described kind of like, I guess, where this style that has taken over the world kind of came from and what it was meant to be, the excitement kind of coming back into it, and understanding and things like that.
Yeah, I think to modern drinkers, this is the most tangible bit of history in this project. It's like all those beers that you love stemmed from Focal and from Header and from this. John Kimmage is the most influential brewer, I think, alive today, possibly along with the brewer of the next beer that we're going to taste. But to see that roller coaster was really fun. To see it's New England, it's New England, and then it was really lovely to see, particularly because people a festival, you although it's seen as like an experiential thing, a lot of people go to where they expect to go. So that was what was great about the tastings. It's like people sat down, had a hazy beer, and were surprised by it, which doesn't always happen.
I definitely felt that, and I think it has probably been the best selling, I guess, in a sense. It's been the beer that's gone quickest. But when people are looking at a tap list and they see the Time Hops beers listed and they see Citra Mosaic, I think that is a big player in it. They see Citra Mosaic and their kind of mind is made up. But like I went back to Centennial, I think that was the beer that surprised people because as a project, people wanted to try all the beers. Citra Mosaic generally was the one that they would try first just because of that combination and that name, and it's something that they're used to. But it was the Centennial that was the one that surprised people the most, I think, in that sense. It's been interesting because it's not the beer that people, when they see the colour, it's not the beer that people, they have in their mind what they're expecting to taste, and it's not quite that, not in a bad way. People have loved it, so. I think the name plays a lot of part in the fact that it's so popular, but also the fact that it's just an absolute cracking beer.
Good times. I reckon it's time to move on to our last beer. If anyone else has got anything to say about this one. No,
just a quick comment to Dr. Sam again. Just posed the question: what is a world without Citra? I think that's what the film Mad Max is loosely based on, isn't it?
That might be the funniest thing you've ever said, Matt.
Thanks, mate. I wrote that down about 10 minutes ago, and I was just waiting to get it in.
You've been trying to get in there. What I will say is, if you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, get some questions in the comments now. If you've got a question for Luke, or for Sean, or for Reiki, Johnny or for Matt or for me, get them in. I am starring a few here to cover at the end of the chat. So get them in now. If they're relevant to this beer, I'll get them in now. If they're relevant to the general project, we'll talk about them at the end. What I will say is my other half bought me a big block of cheddar, and this has been amazing.
What
because-
cheddar? Pilgrim's Choice? Cathedral City?
Oh, mate, whatever's in the supermarket for like £2.95 for a massive block or whatever. Honestly,
Generic cheddar.
You're in a
We're-
supermarket. It's all about David, though. David Stowe's your one. In the
crisis, Johnny. I'm not going cave age at the moment. As much as I love those crystallized little bits of cheddar, we're in a cost of
Sorry,
living
should have set themselves up next to a cheesemonger like Wild Beer Co.
Yeah, exactly. So here we are. The last beer of the evening is Simcoe.
Go.
And again, some nice little bits on the label relating to Simcoe and Russian River. So, Sean, take us away. Tell us all about why you chose Simcoe and why, in particular, you chose Russian River's Pliny the Elder as a target beer.
I was going to do that, Matt.
Who else? All right, get in the comments. Who else has a bottle of Pliny? Are you opening that, Matt?
Oh, you baller!
It's a hat tip to Reiki, who bestowed this beautiful bottle of beer upon me. I think he's got one as well. Look at us, Pliny twins.
They've come prepared.
Sandwich between Pliny's and got nothing to show for it.
Pretty good.
I will be opening it. Yeah, maybe
I
not.
tried my first bit of Pliny about a month and a half, 2 months ago. And my friend got back from California. He went on his honeymoon and bought me back a bottle of Pliny that we then shared together. Stunning! What a stunning, beautiful beer. Yeah, I don't have any with me, sadly. I have some cheese though. Sean, talk to us.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I'll let Luke talk about the.
Yeah.
I'll let Luke talk about the story of Vinny and Simcoe, but I've listened to a few podcasts on it, and he basically sounds like he single-handedly saved Simcoe, and it's just a real influential brewer. So it was almost like after Cascade for me, that was the natural. That was 8 point on the route for sure, and I think it's what I like about it as well is it's kind of like I think Vinny's adjusted the recipe over time to modernize it through techniques that he's learned and research that's been done that takes it away from the Centennial beer and the Racer 5 that we did. So I think it fits in the project quite well. And one of the big things in this is around using less caramels and crystals because there's some research done that shows that they aid in speeding up aging of the beer. And so one of the things Vinny has done is he's kept the same color but used a Munich malt of the same color and just replaced it over time. I think it was in one of the interviews with you, Johnny, you said something that I found really interesting is that any research or papers that you read are a snapshot of like that time, that the information that the brewers had at their fingertips. And, if you take me back 6 months to where I am now, I'll be looking at things differently through this project. So it kind of is a really interesting thing to think about because we all develop and we learn. We always talk about the brewery, learn something new every day. And so, yeah, we went with this beer. We did a lot of trying to select similar profile of Simcoe to what they use at Russian River. And thanks to Yakima Chief, we got flavor diagrams that we could use to just look what we could get available and get as close to what they use. And Simcoe is a real interesting hop from a harvest point of view as well. The flavor profile changes as they harvest, where I think, Luke, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but it starts off quite citrus and grapefruit and then moves more resinous and piney and then over like that's almost like the first week, second week, due to just the hop still being on the vines, it's evolved and becomes more resinous and piney, and then I think it goes a bit more herbal in the last week. And different brewers select it for what they want. So trying to select the same as what they're using at Russian River, I think, was a big part of what we're trying to do with this beer. So yeah, that was a fun. And Johnny and I rubbed some hops together and found that quite interesting. And then Darren and I did that quite a lot as well, and trying to select the Simcoe we wanted to use. And then yeah, just also built up the profile for Pliny using a few other hops. We used Centennial, a bit of Columbus, Amarillo, and then a lot of Simcoe.
Nice. Luke, talk to us about Simcoe.
Yeah, someone asked in the chat a little while ago, what is my favorite hop? Very simple answer. My favorite hop is Simcoe. My favorite hop has been Simcoe for at least 15 years. My favorite hop has been Simcoe since the first moment I tried a beer with Simcoe in it. Completely changed my interpretation of what hoppy beers could be. And I think it did the same for a lot of brewers as well. And like, you guys have absolutely picked the correct beer to tell the story of Simcoe. It's a hop that predates the hop breeding company as we know it now. So the private breeding company with Yakima Chief Ranches that gave us the Citra, Mosaic, Equinaut, Laurel, Sabros, just about everything in the last like 15 years or so. And Simcoe was released it was the second or third commercialized hop variety from Yakima Chief Ranches purely. It's, again, I talked about Jason Perrault, who bred Mosaic. Jason Perrault is Simcoe's daddy. Simcoe was released into the market in 2000, so it's 22 years old, Simcoe, and arguably is more relevant now than it ever was for the first like 5-6 years of its life. It also, if you put 15 years onto that as well, Simcoe was developed a long time ago. And it's that perfect kind of jump off point, I would say, or perfect kind of tipping point rather, of when hops stopped being about bitterness and started being about flavor. Simcoe was bred because it is incredibly agronomically stable, so incredibly resistant to downy mildew, for parasites. It's incredibly hearty. It doesn't require quite so much water as some of the other varieties as well. It's got a great picking window as well, which Sean kind of talked about earlier. Simcoe harvests quite early in the window, like a good few weeks before the Citra Mosaics of the world. And it's just a very, very sound hop for farming. It also happens to have alphas that hit that like 16-18 mark quite comfortably as well. So it's an incredibly good bittering hop, and that's kind of what the initial jump off point for Simcoe was. But we almost have to go way back to what we were talking about with Cascade, is when Yakima Chief were putting Simcoe in the hands of brewers 22 years ago, everyone was just like, what the hell is that? Like, no, and no. And it wasn't resonating because it's got too much of that pine kick. But as well as the pine kick, I always get a lot of passion fruit out of Simcoe as well. Like, it's got a tropical thing that kind of became what we now talk about as juicy these days. But 22 years ago, no one was talking about that. Everyone was talking about, what the hell have you done to that beer? And a few of my colleagues that are still with Yakima Chief now, real dedicated to just putting these hops in the hands of certain brewers. And we are incredibly lucky that one of the brewers that they put this into was Vinny from Russian River. And at that point, Pliny had been brewed a couple of times beforehand. It had a reputation of a little cult classic locally to where they are. And Vinny put Simcoe in a version of Pliny. And this was when Pliny was a once a year brew. It was like almost where we are with Pliny the Younger these days, but where it was with Elder. And he put it into once a year brew, and he loved it. And a few of the people around him loved it. And he sent some feedback back to Jason Perrault and some bottles. And Jason tells this story infinitely better than I will do. And he actually tells it on the documentary. But send some bottles back with just YCR 14 written on it, which is the breeding code number for Simcoe. That is the brand name of Simcoe effectively. And it made it back to Jason, and Jason was like, damn, like, okay, someone gets what this hop is supposed to be doing. And Vinny changed the recipe of Pliny to incorporate Simcoe, and the version of Pliny that I would say 99% of people that have ever drunk Pliny has always had Simcoe in it. And it really is at this point, Simcoe's been around for 2 or 3 years by the time that Pliny goes regularly available, at least regularly available in that part of California, I should say. Still not particularly available. And people were going on their beer pilgrimages. I'm sure a few people on this call have done that particular beer pilgrimage. And they were going there and they were drinking the beer and they were like, what is it that makes Pliny so magic? And the answer is Simcoe, really. It is the beer that put Simcoe on the map. It's the beer that turns Simcoe from being, oh, we've got like 3-4 back vintages of this sitting in the warehouse, someone want to take it, to we're taking futures for Simcoe 2, 3, 4 harvests in advance. And it really kind of changed the landscape for hops. It laid the foundations for the citrus of the world. I mean, it literally is the foundation of Mosaic. And it allowed the successes of Simcoe allowed private breeding programs in the US as we know them today to exist. Were it not for the successes of Simcoe, we wouldn't have had the level of investment into our breeding program that then went hand in hand and created the hop breeding program that literally, if you look through the hop breeding program, there is not a high profile hop in America that's come out in the last 15 years or so that hasn't come out of that breeding program. And if you go a few years before that, everything came out of the breeding programs that became that breeding program. But for me, it all starts with Simcoe. It's the big change point, I would say, for American brewing. And then as far as European brewing goes, I mean, we have to give it a huge audit to Russian River for this. But a few years later on the lines, we've got the very, very early days of Brewdog as well, putting Simcoe into Punk IPA and kind of turning it into a household name in Europe as well, when it had that kind of cult status in America. And it really is down to the work that Russian River did to put it on the market, and then the work of Brewdog and Thornbridge as well, and a few people like that in the UK and across Europe, taking the version of West Coast IPAs that were being made by Russian River, Bear Republic, Peter Port, some of these guys, and turning it into the modern version of IPAs that we kind of know of in the UK and across Europe. It's like, it really is it's the jump off point, I would say, for a lot of European hoppy beers is very much this style of beer.
Fair play. So Johnny, you've traveled the world and drunk all these beers, you know, probably more than any of us at the moment, because you do this professionally. How close is this to Pliny? Or my question really is, why is Pliny considered the best?
Well, so we address why Pliny is considered the best in the documentary, which is that it, you know, if you think back, so Pliny was brewed in 1999. with Simcoe, I should say. It was like Luke says, a seasonal before that. The first Simcoe was 1999. That's when the reputation started to build. And what seemed to happen was that we were in the dawn of the internet. People were starting to talk on the internet, both about what beers were great, but also homebrewers talking about what hops were great and how to use them. So we had basically this beer that was using Simcoe and was tasting amazing. Homebrewers were starting to try to recreate it. Drinkers were traveling to go taste it, or pushing their local breweries to start using it. So everything sort of stemmed back. Anybody that you asked would go, well, it was this brewery called Russian River that was, producing this beer and inspiring everybody. So the reputation of Simcoe and the reputation of Pliny are very much hand in hand. A couple of people in the comments have said, the aroma is much more muted than it was for the Citra Mosaic, which is also why I was surprised that we'd switched these two round, because the Citra Mosaic is a much more modern style of beer. And I was just doing some quick Googling just so I could try and get my maths right. But essentially, the amount of dry hop, which is what drives the huge aroma, mostly in these beers. So Pliny the Elder uses 2 pounds per barrel. So 2 pounds per barrel, it works out. It works out at about. Reiki, you're gonna have to help me here, but I think it works out at about 4 grams per 4 grams per liter of dry hop.
You're trying to convert old money into new money. That's
I know.
difficult.
I mean, it's an absolute nightmare. But
it's about 3.5 grams per liter. Yeah,
3.5 grams per liter, right? So if you compare that to, I mean, like at the peak of what Cloudwater were doing, they were going at 35 grams per liter. So literally 10 times the amount of hops, right? And that's not like bigger is definitely not fucking better. And hopefully Cloudwater would tell you that as well. But what's really interesting is that we've sort of talked about this, and we talk about it in the documentary, as there being a slow shift, from bittering towards aroma. And with this one, we're pretty much slap bang in the middle. We're slap bang between the 80s and between like the 2010s when these hops really take off, in 2012 when that switch happens between aroma hop growing and bittering hop growing. But so this beer was a bit of a crossroads in terms of what your actual aim was and what you were using these hops for. So we have to remember that aroma was still, if you sniffed a beer with big aroma, you'd be like, whoa, what's going on here? Or you'd be thinking with the equipment that you had, you're like, I couldn't add more hops in this. 2 pounds per barrel was insane. I think Racer 5 is 3 pounds per barrel on the dry hop, so a little bit higher actually for a slightly lower ABV beer. So this beer was supremely about balance. If you think about where we've ended up in craft and where we started with the production of blondes, wheat beers, American porters, all that kind of stuff, right back at the start, and Sierra Nevada Pale. This was about as far as consumers would go at that point, and it's still all about that balance between the hop and the malt coming together. So the aroma is really low, but as the comments have also said, the flavor is all there. And when we did our homebrew with Vinny, so we collaborated and did a West Coast IPA together on the Craft Beer channel, the thing he said, the most important thing we can do, if you want to call this a collaboration, is I want you putting hops in throughout the boil. I don't want a bittering addition at the start and an aroma addition at the end. There's going to be a 60, a 45, a 30, a 15, a 10, maybe a 5, and then we're going to go into the whirlpool. And then once we've whirlpool, we're going to crush it. We're going to do the dry hop. And that's how he creates structure and flavor and body and texture by adding all these different points with these hops. So this beer feels on the aroma, you're going to be like, we're not going to expect a huge amount. And then when it's on the tongue, you get hit with bitterness at the start. You get it when you swallow. You have sweetness just after that bitterness hits. Yeah. And then you have some on the end as well. You have it in the aroma. You have it in the flavor. On the texture, you have like this crisp, lovely carbonation, but then you also have a slight caramel kind of treacliness to it as well. It's just like complex in the way that the Cascade was by using the whole hop, creating through the use of all these ingredients, lots of little nuances that, even this, and this is my favorite of the four, doesn't quite have. This has a complex aroma. I wouldn't consider it a really complex beer, whereas this one, you could I've tasted this beer 7 or 8 times now, and every time it tastes a little bit different. It smells a little bit different. It feels a little bit different. It depends on what I've drunk recently, what I've eaten recently, what beers I've drunk recently, how fresh it is, where it's been stored. The context of this, am I doing this on a live show or just beforehand to get fresh for it? This beer just changes constantly, and that's why Pliny has lasted forever, along with the changes he's made to the recipe along the way. I don't think it's £2 per barrel now. I think it's a little bit higher. I think it said it's either Pliny or Blind Pig, like the IPA, which again is like local banger and heady. It's like everyone drinks Blind Pig. I think it's better. Yeah. I think it's Blind Pig has a little bit of Citra in it now. Vinny doesn't like Citra, but there's about 5% Citra in there. The beers that he brews are all about nuance, and a lot of the beers that we drink today are all about in-your-face aroma, and that's awesome. But when you come back to a beer like this, suddenly you've got an 8% beer that doesn't taste a lot stronger, a lot trickier to drink than a 5.6.
Yeah.
I think on that, Johnny, I think it's like a lot of people have an expectation of what Pliny is going to be before they've tasted it, and then they taste it. But I think you built up. This doesn't happen to everyone, but I think a lot of people are saying they build up what they think it's going to be, and then they taste it and they're actually almost disappointed at first, but then they come back because it's just really drinkable, crisp, it's clean, everything you want in it is there, but it's like you said, he does it at £2 per barrel. We did this at £3 per barrel, or 2.99, but it is a much lower rate. Citra Mosaic, we did at £5.5 per barrel.
Well, that's still pretty low, isn't it?
Well, John said between 5 and 6 is where they are, right. But he still thinks he is dry hopping low compared to what people are doing in the States. So he said he keeps his dry hop on the lower end, which is 20 grams per litre.
Which speaks more to what Luke said, like the yeast is a huge part of that. The yeast is kicking out a lot of the stone fruit aroma that a lot of people think comes from.
But it's also your process and your technique and how you do it and what you do with it. He only moves his beer with nitrogen, and that helps with the aroma as well, and lots of things like that. Or it's like you said, it's all the 1%, and he's probably got 20% of them.
Yeah. The other lovely thing, which I think went live on our interview with Vinny. We did the homebrew, and then the conversation was so good we put an hour of just me and Vinny chatting about making IPA. But he said that he's very good friends with the founder of Monkish, and Monkish Brewing down in LA make absurdly hoppy beer. Like when I've drunk it, it's been too hoppy for me. There's too much dry hop character. It's a little bit kind of chalky for me, but they frequently trade beer, and Vinny said that he still frequently gets emails back from the founder of Monkish going, "Do you swear on your life that this is £2 per barrel?" Because Monkish are putting it in closer to £20 per barrel. Hiya, says Luke. It is about technique, about that recipe, and about finding that balance that can accentuate certain things. So I just love that anecdote about it's not how much, and I'm glad that we've moved out of that phase in craft beer where we're like, this is 25 grams per barrel, so it's going to be grams per litre, so it's going to be better. That's just it's dick swinging, to be honest. It's got zero basis in reality.
And there's more research happening now. There's a lot more papers coming out around dry hopping, which is something that wasn't being done 5-10 years ago. Now there's a huge focus on it. So there's more research going into it, a lot more information out there to actually realize like that putting more in can help, can make a better beer, but it's not always the case. You got to understand actual hop variety that you choose as well with the amount you're putting in.
Yeah, I remember someone coming up to Sean and I at Time Hops and actually talking about there's a point where you're going to get the most out of your hops. Then beyond that, you're then going to have to actually use more to achieve what I don't know, different levels. So
diminishing returns.
Yeah. And that conversation went on for quite a while.
Okay, the conversation had diminishing returns as well, Ricky.
Sorry.
Did the conversation have diminishing returns as well?
No, I mean, it was really cool. It was like really interesting to have this guy just come up and start talking to Sean about this, and it's like it was a learning experience for me, and just grabbing that knowledge out of Sean and the guy's understanding of the reports that he'd been reading.
Yeah,
It's
he's one
very
of
much.
the.
So go ahead.
I was just saying he's one of the older homebrewers from the Reading homebrewer community who does a lot of reading and research and knows his technical stuff.
Yeah,
So
every
it was
day's
a good
school day,
good
basically, when you're
conversation.
brewing.
Yeah.
I was going to say there's very much like there's a perfect position in the brew per hop and per process as well, which is something that's becoming a lot more common and a lot more understood these days than it was even like 2 or 3 years ago. To understand what compounds in certain hops survive into the final beer when used at certain processes as well. And yeah, it's like Sean was saying, it's very much there's a level of that we've kind of understood for a long time, and we've kind of realized in the last few years that actually there's probably more that we don't know than we do know now, and it's very much things are pushing into a whole other dimension of the best kind of hop utilization by time, by variety, by process, and everything now.
Yeah.
And the new hop products that like YCH are coming up with as well. 30 grams per liter of cryo hops would be
60, 70 grams
yeah,
per liter of a T90.
It would be a lot, yeah. So that whole way of measuring it is outmoded as well now, yeah.
So to use like an analogy, would you say it's kind of the same in cooking, where keeping it simple sometimes is maximizing flavor? Just like simple processes, using good ingredients, using them properly, not over elaborating. Is that? Do you think that kind of is in the same relation to beer? Just good ingredients, keeping it simple, and using them properly.
The quality of ingredients is like the most important thing in there, but correct usage of things is really important. I mean, like even from our own R&D team and stuff like that, it can be the best hop in the world, but if you're not using it at the correct point in the brew, it might not be giving you the same returns in the finished beer, in the can, or in your glass at the end of it as well. There is every hop has a little Cinderella spot.
Okay, so we need to move on. We're going to get some last questions in, and we've got a bunch of them to go through. So do keep getting them in if you've got them, because it's your last chance. Last bit on Simcoe. For those of us who have never tried Pliny, how close is this? Who wants to have a go with that?
I think
One of the two that have a bottle.
I mean, I tasted this
Crack the bottle.
At Time Hops the other week. This was on pour on the Friday and the Saturday, and Sean had said to me, just caked it on the Thursday, so it tasted a bit raw. So drinking this can now, which is 2-3 weeks on, it's settled down and it's got a lot closer. Yeah, it's got a lot closer to Pliny. The clarity's not exactly there. The kind of golden color is there, because Pliny is actually really quite golden, almost Pilsner looking. It's not the closest one out of the four, but it's a great tasting beer. It's a beer I've actually appreciated a lot more now with some age in the can.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I think that the Cascade and the Citra Mosaic are incredibly close. I think the Centennial could have done with a bit more caramel crystal kind of character, whichever malt you used. And the Simcoe has a bit more fruitiness to it, a little bit less resin and pine than I remember Pliny. But I just want to say that when you're making a recipe for the first time, to make 4 of them in nearly as many weeks as the first time, using techniques you've never used, like with the Cascade thing, where you were literally making up the process as you went along because you didn't use fucking whole cone hops. The job that has been done by you and the team, Sean, is beyond insane. Like, as far as IPA brewing in this country goes, I've never seen an achievement like that. It's utterly incredible, and hopefully the comments are getting that across as well, because everybody's loving these beers. But it's just bonkers. You know, some of these beers took a decade to round out and to be right, and you've gone, hey, a couple of emails, and I think you smashed 2 of them out of the park and got 2 within the point where I wouldn't notice it in a blind taste test. It's insane. So
yeah, and he's not just doing 19 liters like we would be at home.
yeah, that too. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, we do this as a job as well. So, but I appreciate that. I think it was one of the projects that I've done more research for recipes than any other project. And first of all, the thing that was great is there's so much information out there. Brewers are very happy to share. They're very happy to help home brewers. They're very happy to help other brewers. And that's incredible and makes a great community. So I put a lot of work into this to get it. I saw there was a question around, do I prefer making like tributes or new recipes together? The way we approached this project was we made a recipe first and then went to the brewery, so that they were coming off our ideas and helping us to develop it. And what we didn't want to do is just go to the brewery and say, give us all the information and we'll take that and make a recipe. So, but I did read a hell of a lot of stuff on the internet and went down rabbit holes of stuff I didn't start out looking at. That was really interesting. But yeah, there's some, we had enough information to get really close to some. We had, a lot of help. And, like I said, for Citron Mosaic, there was a huge amount of stuff that I wouldn't have done, that we changed the direction on it and went with that. And it blew my mind how the beer turned out. So it was great, yeah.
Good times. Right, let's get some questions. Timmy giving me cheese envy. I'll be honest with you, if you can match cheese, if you can eat some cheese with any of these beers, it is stunning. So there we go. Right, here we go. AV quality is superb. Steve, what are you guys using? We are using StreamYard.com. It's a great piece of equipment. We had that a couple of times, so I wanted just to go with that. So, did you guys have to get any new yeasts for this project, Sean?
Yes, we got in new yeast for all the beers. We didn't use our house yeast for any of them, but 3 of the beers used the same yeast because it is just such a good yeast, which is Chico yeast. And then
which lab?
We got in. Sorry?
Which lab do you use, Sean?
We got it from a mega yeast in the States. That's where we get our specialty yeast from. And it's the Chico yeast. I think it's called West Coast 1. Actually.
Yeah, it's a great yeast.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we use Conan, all the closer we get to Conan, which is Omega's yeast version, which is called Dipper. Really good. I'd recommend it.
Here we go. How come you didn't use Chinook, the great hop? Sean?
It is a great hop. I love using Chinook in the background, layering in flavor, but I don't think we found a beer that kind of led us on the path with it. And we do use Chinook a lot, but yeah, we could only pick 4 hops and 4 beers.
Cool.
I think just to expand on that, so Centennial is a lot like Chinook, and it's a wonderful kind of addition to a hop regime, but a single hop Chinook would be quite a bold choice, whereas a single hop Centennial, Bell's Two Hearted is a classic example of it. So Chinook is a wonderful kind of team player, and so Centennial, but Centennial, makes a lot of beers incredible.
Centennial has a nickname, Super Cascade, so.
Yeah.
All right. Next question is for Luke. Luke, what is your favorite hop?
I'm a Simcoe guy. Like I said, Simcoe was a love at first smell for me, and it was very much cemented the first time I tried it. And a couple of people talking about the experience of Pliny as well. Like it's all kind of tied into my little love affair with Simcoe as well. And I will say that like haze quality of the Simcoe versus Pliny, I think this is a hell of a lot better than any of my homebrew versions of Pliny have been. So it's good, and I've been trying to brew a decent clone of Pliny for about 10 years.
All right, quick fire answers. Reiki, favorite hop?
Centennial.
Johnny, favorite hop?
SARS.
Oh, good shout.
Matt,
Come
favorite
on.
hop?
Osaka.
Sean, favorite hop?
Mosaic.
Mosaic. Vic Secret.
That'd be my number 2.
All right. What are your thoughts on Nelson Sauvin?
Number 2 hop.
Number 2 hop. Why, Reiki?
Just love that winey taste of it. The gooseberry that just offers so much, and you can layer it with so many other hops as well. Beautiful hop.
Mm-hmm.
Sean, am I right in we've used Nelson in our newest,
Blush.
well, second newest beer, Blush, to get that kind of grapey kind of character that goes with it?
Yeah, I tried that beer at the weekend. That is lush, and also obviously Lord Nelson from Mr. Parker.
Yeah,
that's also a banging beer.
It gives that wonderful grapey when you're making a rosé beer, Sean.
It does.
Clang.
Nelson, my second favorite.
Why?
Yeah,
big Nelson guy. Like similarly to the reasons that Reiki was saying, I don't think Nelson it does something that nothing else has really done up until very, very, very recently, and we've had Nelson for a long time. It's just that perfect finesse kind of. There's something that, and again, I'm from a wine background before I started working here. There's something in Nelson that smells like a cracked tomato stalk. Frying tomatoes, crack that stalk open, and it's something that you get in some of the best Sauvignon Blancs from New Zealand, and unsurprisingly, Nelson's from the same region as all of those best Sauvignons. And it's a beautiful parity, and it's so versatile. Works great in Belgian-style beers, works great in sour beers, works great in hoppy beers. It's just a banger.
Excellent. Good times. All right, next question. Is Tim related to Stiffo, Reiki? Am I?
I've never seen you in the same room.
You have seen us in the same room. And
I have, yeah.
As soon as I met the man,
That's my favourite
we
question.
instantly fell in love because we are the same person. That is true. Right. Do you think there's a gap in the UK for tributes to internationally famous beers which you can't buy easily in the UK? It's essentially what we've done with this project, but is there a bigger gap here, or is it just this project?
I think we've seen this done. There's a certain massive chain of really awful pubs that kind of do homages of American beers brewed in English breweries. They just don't seem to match up. I don't think there is a market for it.
I think I'd also say that with all due respect to British breweries and any other nation, that kind of happens on a daily basis, whether it's through collaboration, whether it's through Reddit forums and all that stuff that Sean was on. Like we're all tasting stuff and going, fuck, that's incredible. How do I recreate that and digging into it? So essentially, if we were doing that, it would almost be a marketing exercise. It would be like, well, we're going to brew a clone of this. And like somebody said in the comments earlier, it's like, this could have been that. But it's been
so much more
than that. Through the storytelling, through the production of the beers, through the stuff that's been learned. So yeah, there would be a market in it. Somebody could come out and go, yeah, I'm going to brew Julius, but in the UK. But it's a Citra Mosaic New England beer. And, if you're not trying to copy that beer, what are you doing? Because it's the best Citra Mosaic New England IPA in the world, with Focal Banger accepted, but that's a different beer. We're all art is a slight imitation of something else, and it's finding your own angle on it.
I think the backbone of this is all about the sharing of information and ideas, and that's it's generated 4 beers that are homages to the originals, and are not trying to be clones. And I think homage is different to a clone, and that's why this works.
Yeah, I think like Johnny said as well, when we get into the beer style of the moment, which is still the beer style of the moment, New England IPA, most things are an homage to one of like 2 or 3 beers, and we've tasted one of the better ones tonight. And Julius is another one that Johnny's talking about as well. And it's very much is, if you're coming from a New England perspective, you are either coming from a Treehouse perspective or an Alchemist perspective. And I think everyone's got a favorite of those two, but we're all very, very familiar with really quite wonderful homages to those beers, whether we realize they are or not, I think.
Fair play. All right. Next question. Where can we get Pliny the Elder in the UK? Never had it. Does anyone know?
You go to the list, say,
You can get it for Reiki. Reiki's such handing them out like a madman.
No. I've just been lucky the last couple of months. I've got a friend who works for Facebook, and she's my beer mule.
Right.
You can buy it at Whole Foods.
I'm your favourite then, Reiki. Is that what it is?
It's those little chipmunk cheeks and that beard, Matt.
I just want to say that you're not going to get Pliny the Elder. Like, if you want that experience, you're going to have to go there or find a mule. But there are some incredible West Coast brewers in the UK. Siren are one, Elusive in the same training as they were another. Burnt Mill are really, really fucking good at West Coast IPAs. Who else would I include? Anyone else?
There's a lot out there, Johnny.
There's a lot of good ones, but those are the ones I would head to first. The man who isn't there that Andy did last year was stunning. Oregon Trail is stunning. Burnt Mill, Pintle, and just some of the other beers that they're putting out, stunning, banging. Double Barrel have done some good ones as well.
There you go.
I would very much throw into that mix.
Yeah, Mike at Double Barrel, he's got obsessed with West Coast.
Luke, question for you on screen there. Is there a pressure to grow certain hops, squeezing out others?
Less so a pressure and more so brewer demand. I mean, there's the Yakima Valley is like a little Goldilocks zone. It has just ludicrous amount of hours of sunshine in the year. It's got the Cascade Mountains that have natural snow melt that feeds water into the valley, normally perfect mineral-rich water. So there is only so much acreage to grow hops perfectly. And it's very much down to what brewer demand is. Most hops are sold 2-3 years advance in on contract. So there is the level of acreage there is. And the only other factor other than brewer demand is this a viable product to grow from a farming perspective? There are, like, if we go into the HBC program, as we're talking about, like the Citra Mosaic and things like that, we're into the thousands and thousands of crosses that have been in there, and there have been 9 hops brought to market since 2007 in that. So it needs to be a sound commercial product. Like, it needs to be something that will survive harsh weather. Hey, we're in a drought. We've had incredible rainstorms. We've had massive fires and things like that over the last few years. But more importantly, it is the things that the Seans of the world tell us that they want us to grow.
Fair play. All right, we're going to have to crack through this because there's a lot of questions. So on for... sorry, no, we've done that one, haven't we? Sean and Reiki here. If you want to get the best out of your hobby beers, what are the best malts to use? Let's go to Sean first.
I think one of the things we started looking to move away from is like using Maris Otter as a base malt in hobby beers. So just using a best pale ale or something and some lager malt, and you can blend the two of them just to give the hops a bit more space to show themselves off. That's something we're looking at. Maris can have quite a multi-character that can hide some of the hop character.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And I kind of learned that from Johnny's video that he did with Vinny, that extended interview, just purely chatting to Vinny. It's like he just raves about Simpson's best pale. He would just use 100% of that if he could. But then also, your water is also really key and important to get the most out of your hops. Because if you're in a hard water area, those hop flavors are just going to die within a week or two once you've packaged your beer.
So something I just add is the best thing I ever did was go to my local IPA brewery, which is a great brewery called Baron, who I learned wasn't using any other water source than what was coming out of the ground, and just said, "What are you doing to your water?" And he gave me a guide as to how he treats it, so his beers present well. So if you're struggling with your water chemistry, just go to them and go, "What are you doing to your water?" Because I want to get the best out of my hops, and hopefully they definitely will share it with you as a home brewer. So just go ask a brewer there.
Your local brewery, but if you haven't got a local brewery, you can get your water tested. We do that service in terms of you can buy it and you can send it off to Murphy's. They'll tell you what your results are and what you should be using for certain styles.
Oh, cool. Good. There you go.
I think it's important that people think about water profiles, but maybe malts more in beers. You buy a can of beer, you look at the hops on the label. No one's really looking at the malts, and even an IPA, I think it does really affect it, and yeast as well.
It's always been the way, Tim. Hops are the kind of like the rock star lead singer.
100%.
And then you kind of forget about the malts.
As a guitarist, I think you need to look away from the lead singer. You need to look at the bass player. You need to look at the drummer. These all make a great band.
The yeast is the drummer. If there's no drummer, there's no beat.
There you go. Yeah, and that's what we've been trying to do on the blog recently, and Johnny and Brad doing much better on the Craft Beer channel. So do check them out. Right. Okay. Next question. 15 years goes to get elements of ginger from Centennial. How much does the trend market affect brewers' choice of hops versus the expression of unique properties? Big question, Luke.
Big question.
I think a lot of it is down to understanding of the hops themselves as well. If every single year the picking window is different for certain hops. Yakima Chief, we're incredibly stringent. Some of our picking windows are a matter of days. Some of them are a matter of day. Some of them can stretch a much wider period as well. So we're constantly looking for what is the perfect position for hops. But a lot of brewers around the world, Siren included, have a selection process of their hops as well. So if brewers select that express a certain characteristic, and it will over time marginalize others, is probably the best way of phrasing it. Everything that hop breeders do is to best serve brewers, which is to best serve consumers effectively. So the consumer taste explains what the brewers are doing, and what the brewers' tastes are. It kind of leads into what we do in the farms.
I mentioned earlier that I'm still learning such a ton from doing these tastings and things like that. And I think one thing that me and you spoke about, Johnny, at LCBF was that if we get to a point where we can have a conversation when someone drinks a beer and they're like, is this an early harvest, a mid harvest, or a late harvest Simcoe beer? And that kind of blew my mind, because I'd never even thought about that. I was thinking that, you've got a hop, these are the characteristics, and then you move on. But to then even go to that extra extent to say, depending on where you pick this hop, you'll get different flavors. And I think it absolutely blows my mind that beer is that intricate, but also at the same time, it massively excites me that, it's not just the combinations of ingredients you use, it's when you pick them, it's when you harvest them that has a huge effect on the beer. And I think not only is it kind of like overwhelming and mind-blowing, but like super exciting at the same time.
So many of us forget that, Matt. So many of us forget that the natural ingredients, hops, are like something that's grown. Yeast is something that's living. So people don't think that like all these hops, they also have to think about, well, we need to pick this hop this week, this hop the week after, and you've got to kind of almost choose what you're going to grow so you can actually get your workforce to kind of pick at the right time.
And never overlook the importance of terroir in hops as well. I mean, like I said earlier, I'm from a wine background, but it's exactly the same thing. The picking windows in Washington State are not the picking windows in Oregon State, and not the picking windows in Idaho. The picking windows right on the edge of the Cascade Mountains are not the same as the picking windows at the bottom of the South Valley. So it's the perfect picking window for the perfect farm is the most important thing.
Wine's done a pretty good job. I mean, I'd never want beer to end up with wine. There's a lot of pretension and a lot of confusion, I think, in wine education. But it would be really great to have some of that recognition of where something's grown or when something's picked, making a difference to the flavour, so that we don't just go, well, there's Citra in this, so I'm expecting this, or there's Mosaic in this, I'm expecting this. Maybe there's going to be some variation within those varietals. And I know that makes it really hard as a new person in beer to understand, what they're going to get from a Mosaic beer, and that's a challenge that breweries and educators have to kind of meet head on. But I think in terms of us making beer feel like a natural product again, instead of a very commercialized product like macro lager has been, for better or for worse, that's what's got to happen. We've got to connect it with the original ingredients, like I do in my book.
It's the nature of craft beer that is differing. It's not a macro product, or that changes day in day, or that is consistent. Craft brewing is that it can change, and that is the difference. And it's a story to tell. So that's your story to tell, Johnny. Right.
Yeah, we're saying that. Sorry, just
some questions now. Next time, can we get cheese and beer? That was last time, so that's a quick one to cover.
You can just buy my book.
Yeah. We did cheese and beer last time, though. So, Luke, quickly, are there any hops like Sabro that we might expect to see become mainstream over the next couple of years? Also, yes, Sabro for the win. I'm a big Sabro fan.
I'm a big Sabro guy. And anyone that doesn't like Sabro needs to have a word. Sorry, Ray. But
get rid of coconut, man. Get rid of the coconut.
Great, it's a great hop.
I can appreciate it if you love that flavour. Actually, it's an intense and really clever hop.
Yeah. The Near Mexicanos family is like a semi-wild variety. Sabro has a daughter, which is Talus. There's also HBC 472. If anyone's tried it, it tastes like bourbon oak. It's absolutely bizarre. You've got things like Zappa, which tastes like Parma Violet sweets. There's a whole host.
It's going to make it very easy for Pilot Beer to brew their Parma Violet.
They don't brew anything.
Well, everyone knows they're just a Twitter account on it.
Well, Pat told me that when they first brewed their Parma Violet beer, they were too scared to approach the sweet company to say that we're going to brew a beer out of it. So they had to buy individual packets of the sweets and then unwrap all the sweets and put them in. I was like, why don't you just ask the company for a load of sweets? And they're like, yeah, we didn't want to tell them that we're making a beer out of it. So this hop's going to make it easy for them.
Zappa hops use the flavor descriptor of purple. That's what Zappa says Zappa tastes like, is purple.
It's a flavour, just like blue. Blue's a flavour.
There you go. Luke, another one for you here. No, that's the same one. US government support to develop commercially viable product hops seems unusual, very effective. Hopefully that means something to you.
Yeah, I mean, the USDA is it's a government-funded public breeding program out of Oregon State University, and there's still public hops being released today. I mean, there was a Vista that was released at the most recent harvest. We've had some really good success from. Triumph was released a couple of years previous to that as well. So there are still public hops, as recently as the 2021 harvest, still coming out of that USDA breeding program as well. It's fundamental to what happens in the US with what's happening on the public breeding programs and what's happening in private breeding programs like ours. It really is kind of pushing everything forwards, and it's a massively progressive thing that the US government invests heavily in, that bring it back to a slightly more local perspective. We've not really done in the UK for 40, 50 years, and it's kind of what's left UK hop breeding in the position it is now versus American hop breeding, which is going from strength to strength to strength, really.
Excellent. This says question for Matt, but then it actually corrected with question for Luke. When is the Yakima Chief web store opening for the UK? Do you know?
We are actively working on a B2C solution as we speak.
Excellent.
TVC.
Good answer. Sean, can we visit you guys at Siren?
Yeah.
I think I
If
will.
Yeah.
I tell you what, if you want to come to Siren, come to the Siren Tap Yard anytime.
Yeah.
We're open Tuesday to Sunday.
And you got tours on weekends
Yeah, we do brewery tours.
by the lovely Matt.
Well, yeah, sometimes I'm there, sometimes I'm in Manchester or Leeds or London or wherever the world may take me. But yeah, no, we do brewery tours on Saturdays at 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. You can go onto our website and you can book through there, or if you want to book it for someone else, you can buy a lovely, lovely voucher on our web shop and someone will send it out to you as a gift. So yeah, you can come down and see the brewery, absolutely.
There you go. Okay. Sean, this is a question for you. Of these 4 beers, is there one that we might see or a very close copy of in Siren's regular output?
I think you're going to see parts of this. I definitely want to brew Citron Mosaic without yeast and see how that works. But yeah, I think a lot of similar beers like this will be coming up through us trialing stuff. I think one of the interesting things is I've tasted all these beers now and gone, we could have done that or we could have done this to tweak them. So we definitely want to do more versions of these.
Isn't your hash yeast a variant of Vermont?
Yeah. Original story, the original head brewer brought it over. He's from there. And yeah, it's been through multiple generations and we've got it now stored and we can get it propagated up when we need new yeast.
Good times. All right, Sean, also for you, why do you centrifuge? Is that to reduce the need for finings or just to strip yeast and other debris out?
It's to do that. It helps what would naturally happen in tanks. It helps to just remove the yeast first. It allows us to not have to filter. But we run our centrifuge quite uniquely where we taste the beer at different speeds. The faster you run through the centrifuge, the less you will remove. You don't only strip solid, you also strip some flavor and some aroma. So we taste it at different speeds and pick the speed that we want for that product or that beer. So it's really helpful for just kind of not having to filter and remove sediment. And it helps us with yields in our conical tanks.
Fair play. Right, next question. Are any UK beers that are equivalent milestones in the craft beer scene? So we're talking about Pliny the Elder, obviously Sierra Nevada Pale Ale here. What are the beers on the UK scene that have hit this, metric? Johnny? You're muted.
Yeah. Oh.
What Martin said was where I was going to go. 100% Jaipur is, Jaipur was originally brewed by Martin Dickey, who went to Brewdog. And that beer has continued to be sort of a touch point for a lot of brewers in the UK. I think Gamma Ray Beavertown essentially set the London scene alight, but that was all based off of Colonel and the stuff that they did. I think what's interesting is a lot of the UK beers, modern UK beers, haven't had so much of an international impact. We recently did a collaboration with Clawhammer Supply, another YouTube channel, and the only brewery he knew was Cloudwater from the UK and Verdun, but only because he watches our channel. So I think the UK is waiting for a modern brewery that really breaks out and does something that's culturally, entirely new and unique, like we've seen with Sierra Nevada, with these four beers.
Is that possible, Johnny? Nowadays in beer, is that possible?
I don't think it is. And it's not just down to the beer; it's the cost of shipping products to the States.
No, but more, is it possible to be that breakthrough anymore?
I think that, I mean, I understand Reggie's point that it's difficult because we can't necessarily ship it to the States, but a lot of the beers that have made those cultural impacts haven't. It's been more about word of mouth. So if something is brewed in the UK that slowly sort of filters out and makes a big thing. Like I genuinely think that, you know, the Scandinavia has had a cultural impact with pastry stout, you know, with Mikkeller, with Lervig, with Omnipollo, with, you know, those breweries that have created this idea of a pastry stout, which, yeah, you could argue was Florida as well with Hunappu Day. But if you look at like the history of that kind of brewing, it starts a lot earlier than Hunappu does, with sort of smaller different breweries. I think, you know, if the UK is going to do it, and I mean, we literally have a documentary about this coming out. It's going to be about British hops. You know, is there something new that we can add to the hop scene with British hops? And I think we're a way away from that, but I think there's some interesting things happening. Or could it be with traditional styles reinvented, which is essentially what America did with the IPA? It took an old style and it made it new again. And we've seen breweries come close to doing that, but not produce anything particularly exciting. The one thing I would say is mild. You know, we all laugh at the idea of a mild revival. And it is incredibly niche at the moment. But there are literally festivals in the US all about mild. Even in, I think, up in the fucking hop growing regions, like, well, I think it's Seattle, so not quite the hop growing regions, but not far away, where they're having mild festivals.
Festival de mild.
Yeah, and I bet if, you know, Sarah Hughes mild or something like that rocked up there, people would lose their minds, you know. And I think we trash our history. We want to tear it down and say it's twiggy and shit. But actually, in terms of what the rest of the world is thinking, that is world beating, and no one else does a 4% beer that smells of hedgerows and blackberries and caramel and fresh bread. So, you know, maybe that's where British beer can fit in. Maybe it's making session beer with Harlequin or Olicana. All of the great fucking yeasts come from the UK. All of the great malts come from the UK. There's no reason we can't do it. I just don't know what form it's going to take yet.
Well,
Sure.
I think you also got to look at, whenever I'm hosting US brewers over here, you know, they're looking at Harvey's, Fuller's, Timothy Taylor's. You know, those are beers that the US want to make, and when they come here, that's what they want to drink. We should never take cask ale for granted, just because we have it here. And yeah, I think it's a big thing. But another thing that I think really changed the UK beer scene, and which was the Cloudwater Dipper series. I don't know if it's influenced the US necessarily, but you know, that was something that completely threw the UK brewing scene. I think it almost like the US went and brewed a bunch of styles from the UK and just expanded what they did, added more ingredients, and now we've taken those and now we're brewing them here. So,
well, yeah, I think, yeah, you're probably right within Europe, because, you know, the UK does often lead Europe with the rest of it. Like Dipper 3, also, you know, Vermont Tea Party by Siren as well was part of that as well. It's saying, hey, wait, we can do hoppy beer with yeast being a heavy part of that, and that influenced Europe. But I think that story has been lost because it was already done in the US.
Yeah, I mean, I've got many happy memories of Dipper 3 and a local pub putting it on, and me and 3 friends discovering it was on, and it's like we were there for 4 nights in a row just trying to drink that keg. Because it was just
it's a wonderful
else.
difference. Wonderful difference between me and Brad, in that I bought a bunch of those bottles and drank all of them. Brad still has one. Brad's a hoarder. He was like, that was significant, so I'm keeping a bottle.
I had a friend in Northern Ireland like Brad who had a bottle, and it'd been sitting there for like 18 months, 24 months. I drank it afterwards. It was delicious. It was very barley wine-esque.
Well, I mean, that's like John at Alchemist. Like, so they have a great YouTube channel. If you haven't come across the Alchemist YouTube channel, it's really good. It's mostly John sat in his office sounding off about how shit New England IPA is, but every now and then he hits some gold. And one of them is where he drinks Old Heady Topper, and he says it's still great. You know, like, there's this fetish around fresh, but if you have it a year old, 2 years old, there's still something to find there. you just shouldn't expect where it was at the start.
Few
Which is
more
how
questions to
IPA
get
used
to,
to be.
guys. A few more questions to get to. So let's hit these quickly. Malt Miller, do you get to choose the hops from companies like Yakima Chief?
Yeah, we go to Hop Harvest. So this year, so the program this year is Rob's doing the German selection. Joe, who is Rob's wife, who's also an owner of the Malt Miller, she's doing the Yakima selection. She's going out there for a week.
Nice.
So yeah, I do all the contracting, and we contract 4 or 5 years in advance. So if you could just email in and tell me what you're going to be brewing for the next 5 years, that'd be a big help.
Right.
So I have to kind of contract the volumes for the next 5 years.
Here's the important question for you.
Dr. Sam, I love Dr. Sam. So Dr. Sam was also a big supporter of the International Women's Day project we did earlier in the year. She brewed that at the same time. So hello,
Great.
Dr. Sam. And also, like you, I'm a Burmese, so I love mild, and mild should become better. My dog is called Winnie. Winnie is named basically after a drunken night in a pub with my wife, where we said what we're going to call the dog we're picking up tomorrow. And we worked across the top shelf, and I love Del Winnie whiskey, and that's where her name came from.
And that beer that Reiki's talking about there is multiplayer. And are you still selling the multiplayer
We
packs?
sell the kits of that, yes.
Yeah, so go and buy the multiplayer packs because that was a banging beer and a great cause. Right, we got a few more here. So let me try and work out what order we're going to do these. Question for the guys. Vote your fave of the 4 beers. For me, Citra Mosaic or Centennial. So I'm going to do this in order. I think my favourite is probably Citra Mosaic. Luke, yours is Centennial. Why?
I'm a Centennial guy. It's just so reminiscent of the beers that got me kind of head over heels into this industry. It's so reminiscent of what made me fall in love with craft beer. Yeah, it just ticks so many boxes.
Fair play, Sean.
Citra Mosaic, just for how it blew my mind, just
Good
how
time.
it turned out. I thought it was going to be crystal clear after we brewed it. So
there's quite an even tie between Citra Mosaic and Centennial. If Citra Mosaic had turned out like that kind of like super sweet IPA, then it would have been Centennial. But I'm just so grateful that there's a beer that's got that kind of like haze and that fruit, but also that bitterness. Like it's my ideal beer in that sense. It has everything I want in a beer.
Good times, Johnny.
Yeah, Citra Mosaic as well. I mean, Centennial did come close, but yeah, Citra Mosaic as a homage and also as just a beer I drink forever. It's a stunning beer.
Good times, and Reiki.
I'm sitting here with all 4 in front of me in glasses. It's quite a pleasurous night, but Centennial in my head it's my favorite hop, and that is a beautiful beer. But that's Citra Mosaic, Sean. You've just blown my mind with this shit.
Yeah, it's a bit cliche, isn't it? It's the one sort of hazy one.
Yeah, you want to be like Cascade.
It's not the haze. It's
for
just
the
the
win.
cleverness. It's the cleverness of the brew. It's what's gone into that.
It has that punch of bitterness. It's not just fruit juice. It's great. It's the only one that I've actually polished off in the entirety. Okay, good, cool. So this has exceeded my expectations. Really good. So my question is, what's going to be in the sequel?
That's my question too.
Time yeast.
This is probably Sean. Also, this question is what you're going to do next year to surpass this. What's the future?
to be honest, we haven't got a plan yet. We haven't got that far. But, you know, I've thought about it. There's lots of options. And you could do hops from different places in the world. Galaxy from Australia, Nelson from New Zealand. Could do something with German hops. Yeah. But they all came out. You know, one hop we haven't touched on is that I'm using a little bit at the moment. A big fan of is Strata, which kind of is the next hop I think that might rival Citra Mosaic. But I think it's now not going to be about necessarily making an homage to beer, because I don't think there's been enough time for that to be created. So it might just be now exploring the hops and expressing them. But we haven't got that far. It wasn't ever meant to have a sequel, but who knows?
I think it will. I think it will. I think we'll do time hops again.
Sean knows my answer to this question because he knows my happy place is Westbrook Brewery, and I think I said to you, Johnny, like it's not hop, but Westbrook Goes for me was like an absolute like game changer of a beer in terms of the style, in terms of the beer that kind of made me think, wow, this is what beer can be like. But yeah, it's not a hop, is it? It's just sour and salty.
I mean, maybe it is. That's it. Actually, it doesn't become. Maybe it is like about actually. Let's talk to breweries that have changed the beer world and talk about what are their beer styles or something like that. Or maybe it's kind of like there's lots of angles you could come at it, but this is the best story in a festival, in a series of beers. And as Johnny said in his video, I wish I'd thought of this.
So I think it's important, whatever we do, we're not just doing it to make beers. We want to tell a story alongside it. That's something we find really important, and it helps us be more creative and get input and
maybe it's a series about like what English beers defines beer. Like maybe it's kind of like Banksy's mild. Maybe it's Bass Draft. It's like, how do these beers define beer? There's lots of different stories out there within beer. It's just getting them into a package.
Okay, whoever's got budget, I'll tell that story. Yeah. The beers that made Britain, I'm straight in.
It's what's great, isn't it? Like all beer has a story to tell, and all these hops have a story to tell, and these beers have a story to tell. Thank you to Johnny and Brad for helping for us to tell that story. But yeah, and thank you for everyone to joining in. We have, by the way, tomorrow we are releasing this beer here, which is a collab with Brew York, who, if you came to the Time Hops Festival, you may have seen there. It is a black IPA called Out Like a Light. It's a 6% black IPA.
But it's not pale.
Today. Sorry?
But it's not pale.
Yeah, if you follow us on Twitter, you'll have seen us talking to Andy Parker. Andy Parker now about black IPA.
Nice education to Andy Parker about what a black IPA is.
Yeah.
He needs to know. He
only knows how to brew West Coast IPAs. Just leave him alone.
I don't think many people got that joke, and that was
I don't think they did.
Yeah. Right.
Tim, can I say one thing just to the guy who said he's just bought 25 kilograms of Marisota? That's completely fine. We're just talking about in hoppy beers, you can make lots of great beers using Marisota. So don't be bummed about buying 25 kilograms of it.
Lastly, Luke, thank you for joining us again. Thank you for your absolute hop level nerdery. It's fantastic to listen to. We could all listen to it all day long. Brilliant.
Such great passion.
Thank you for joining us again. Thank you for not being locked out. I know this is a retro reference. Reiki, I think this is your debut on a Siren event. Come back soon. Thank you ever so much. Johnny, thank you ever so much for your hard work on the documentary. And of course, Brad as well. I say Johnny, but I mean Johnny and Brad, pair of you. Brilliant. And Matt, of course, thank you for coming on. Any last points? Any last comments? Anyone?
I think I just want to. I think for me, I just wanted to kind of touch on the fact that I've learned so much, and I think I want to continue learning. I think this is a beautiful thing about craft beer, and the beautiful thing about why we do it is that there's no there's no gatekeepers. There's no we know everything. We do it because we want to learn as much as we can. Like every day is a learning day, and I'm really thankful, like Luke and Johnny and Reiki. I learn so much from you, like day after day. Sean, I learn a bit from you. Yeah.
Have you finished all 4 beers, Matt?
Hey?
Have you finished all the 4 beers now? Yeah.
Not quite.
I'm just checking how loved up you are.
I'm just super grateful because.
No, I agree, mate. It's just like seriously, I've got a lot of love for you and Simon, And the fact that you guys are so willing to share how much you're sharing with the homebrew community, Soundwave, the recipe for this, it's brilliant. I love it. Absolutely love it. And it's every day is a school day. We're all learning so much from each other.
And that, that's what it's all about, isn't it? And I think it's quite humbling to be on this chat, but also just share the knowledge with everybody, and hopefully everyone's learned something, and it's kind of sparked a little bit of passion in people to carry on learning and to carry on just fueling that and seeing what they can take from everything that we do.
Amen. There was a comment I was just trying to find about t-shirts, saying if my t-shirt was available to buy. Me and Matt are both wearing Time Hops t-shirts. They're £18 on the Siren Craft Beer website. If you're talking about my t-shirt, then my t-shirt is £200. It's match worn. It's bloody
sweaty. Smells of Tim.
Yeah.
Watermelon t-shirts also available from the
I'll be honest with you, if you want to buy this for £200, I'll put that all into charity. So send me a message. You can have my
if you want to buy this one, I'll keep the money.
Amen. Anyway, chaps, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Everyone watching at home, thank you so much for your comments. Thank you for watching along. Hope you enjoy the series. Don't forget that there is a little code going on, Time Hops tasting for 15% off the web shop before the end of the weekend. Enjoy the beers. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Much love.
Cheers, everyone.
Good night.
Cheers.
Yeah.